Welcome back to the Parliamentary Channel's live coverage of the House of Assembly. Debate on the 2013-2014 budget is what we're dealing with today. We expect the member for Mangrove Key in South Andros to take the floor when the House begins. Could hear from the member for South Abaco, Edison Key, as well, among others speaking this afternoon and this evening. As we wait for members to get ready to begin debate this afternoon, we're going to let you hear Hope Strachan. She was the first presenter this morning. For those of you who may have missed that presentation, we're going to let you hear some of the Seabreeze MP. Here she is this morning.
This budget is important to us as a government. This is our first opportunity to advance our agenda. The 2012-2013 budget that we debated in May last year was a tale of the Ingram administration's mismanagement of the Bahamian economy. Wastage and wanton abuse of public funds was the order of the day. It was a time of exploitation of the Bahamian patrimony. It was a time of a rotten-to-the-core deal which separated the Bahamian people from control of their beloved BTC. Cable and wireless got record-breaking profits, while the Bahamian people got line. Mr. Speaker, lest we forget, lest the Bahamian people forget, some of those who did this are sitting immediately opposite us in this place. Yes. And there they should remain for many years to come.
Yes. Penance.
Mr. Speaker, thank God we are nearing the end of the New Providence Road Improvement Project. That is another F&M disaster. The member for Cat Island, the Minister of Works, recently told the Bahamian people about some pipes that were ordered and purchased by the former government to put in the ground, but what turned out to be completely ill-fitted for the purpose. This mistake will add to the already $100 million over expenditure on the project. It is a natural disgrace. But, Mr. Speaker, I thank God it is coming to an end, and roads will no longer dominate our national agenda. Mr. Speaker, this budget is our budget, our PLP government budget. This is the budget, Mr. Speaker, to secure the future for all Bahamians. This budget, Mr. Speaker, is the Charter for Governance budget, the beginning of the fulfillment of our plan, our PLP plan. Yes. Mr. Speaker, it was delightful to watch the expressions on the faces of those opposite as the member for Centerville read the budget communication. It was priceless. As strategy after strategy was unveiled, plan after plan, initiative after initiative to secure the future of Bahamians, the expressions on the faces opposite became sadder and sadder.
Yes, by the minute.
They looked positively grieved and mournful. They were taken aback by the vision and the innovation of this budget. They hated the fact that we have come up with plans that will benefit the Bahamian people now and for the future.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, 2017 ain't looking too good for that side.
No.
But, Mr. Speaker, you know, the budget didn't, you know, the innovation in the budget didn't stop them, though, from trying to fool the Bahamian people. They immediately launched a campaign of deception. They said that there is nothing, and I quote the word, nothing in this budget for the Bahamian people. That was another priceless moment, as one after the other, they lined up on TV to spin and to weave misinformation to the Bahamian people. The leader said, and that is their leader said, there was nothing there to address crime. But, Mr. Speaker, if $2 million towards the purchase of additional police vehicles to fight crime is nothing, then I say give us nothing. If providing $175 million for the Defense Force to purchase a fleet of boats and to train officers is nothing, then I say give us some more nothing. Mr. Speaker, if making an allocation in the budget of $8 million to employ 450 additional Defense Force officers is nothing. I say bring me more. Nothing.
Yes.
If making financial provision for CCTV to be expanded all over our island is nothing, then nothing is what the Bahamian people want.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, these lean times were created by those opposite,
Yes.
some of whom sat around the cabinet table and agreed to some of the most blatant, most obviously bad decisions made on behalf of the Bahamian people.
Yes.
These decisions derailed urban renewal at a critical time in its development. It set the country back in no small way in our crime prevention efforts. Mr. Speaker, this PLP government does not intend to adopt the attitude of the FNM predecessors. We have introduced Urban Renewal 2.0, an even more improved product, and we are putting our money behind urban renewal. This initiative has already been successful on many levels in the constituencies where the program is ongoing. It has never been more obvious that this PRP government is serious about our obligation to keep the Bahamian people safe. I get the impression from those opposite and many of those who wield the poison pen in this country that they are prepared to see this country destroyed by crime once it decreases the PLP's chances of winning the next elections. They do a marvelous job of paying lip service, of waxing eloquent about working together when they know they have absolutely not the slightest intention of doing so. Anyone who is serious about working with the government to solve crime would applaud the provisions in this budget for urban renewal, the police, and the Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be denied that crime is at an unacceptable level. The proliferation of guns and the wanton disregard for life has consumed a goodly number of our populace. Unfortunately, it is annihilating some of our most precious resources, our young men. It is sad to see, Mr. Speaker, and hear about the vortex of violence. But the fact is, we are confronted with it every day. 2, 3 murders per day now is the norm. The question being asked, Mr. Speaker, by our citizens is what has gone wrong? Where is all of this anger and violence coming from? Of course, Mr. Speaker, there are many theories. Mr. Speaker, I was speaking with a family member, a young male doctor, just the other day, who was bemoaning the carnage of the countless young men who have succumbed to injuries inflicted through knives and guns in recent years. He pointed out how the cycle of violence is perpetuating itself. Mr. Speaker, and this is how it perpetuates itself. A young man murders another. The victim leaves behind fatherless children, sons to be exact. They grow up without the care and nurturing of a father, and they become angry. The murderer then goes to prison to languish for the rest of his natural life, or the better part of it, in a stinking 10 by 10 cell in Fox Hill Prison. He leaves children, a son or two. They grow up without the love of a father and without the necessary positive male guidance. The family structure and all that it is supposed to represent has failed them. They grow angry and they grow bitter. They become easy prey to anyone who, as the young people say, can run a good game. Their own lives and the lives of others become of little consequence, and the cycle of anger and violence then continues. Many are asking now, Mr. Speaker, where are all the guns coming from? But, Mr. Speaker, you know something? We don't manufacture guns in this country. One thing we know for sure is that they are coming from someplace foreign. People outside our borders are arming our citizens to do harm to each other. And we are stupid enough to let them do it. 40 years after we struggled for majority rule and for equality in our country, we are becoming slaves to greed and avarice. That is what is fueling this monster called crime. When you break it down, whether it be drugs, or a flat screen TV, or a computer, or the latest phone, or a car, or a big house, it is just simply greed. Coupled with a warped sense of entitlement, a defunct value system, and a non-belief in the biblical admonition that by the sweat of your brow you shall eat.
Yes, that's the hope.
Mr. Speaker, it is time for the young men in this country to wake up and recognize that they have a responsibility to live and to help to develop this country. I know we women can do it. We've proven ourselves time and time again. But it is time for all hands on deck. Mr. Speaker, if our young men continue to abdicate their responsibility to themselves, their families, and to their country, all of that we have achieved in the last 40 years may be lost. Mr. Speaker, there is 100,000 square miles of ocean, the 700 islands, reefs, and keys with thousands of miles of coastline, which make up this archipelago called the Bahamas, makes for pretty porous borders, which are near impossible to adequately police. But police them we must. It is critical at this time that we be clear, unequivocal, and unwavering in our immigration policies. And our measures to stem the tide of illegal immigrants and illegal weapons, which is threatening our very way of life. Mr. Speaker, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, the position that the Honorable Member for Fox Hill has taken with respect to immigration, I support 100%.
Yes, new sheriff in town.
Mr. Speaker, we need the additional personnel for the defense and police forces, and we need those ships that Bain and Grantstown had the gall to ask the Cabinet for, and which the Cabinet, Mr. Speaker, had the temerity to grant.
That's right.
Despite the huge capital investment, I believe the Bahamian people understand implicitly that we are trying to protect them and to preserve our own sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, I believe this is an appropriate time to thank the Commissioner Greenslade, Commodore Roderick Bowe, the Director of Immigration, and the cadre of men and women who work diligently to protect the citizens of this country. If you want to know the value of these agents to our national security and personal safety, imagine living in an environment where you don't have access to them. So, Mr. Speaker, I also think that it is important, too, at this time to thank all in our country who accept and acknowledge their duty to assist in the maintenance of law and order in our society by abiding by the law themselves, reporting breaches of the law where they occur, and carrying out their civic duty as jurors. This is an essential component in our criminal justice system, but it calls for great sacrifice. Mr. Speaker, as the opposition, as I indicated after the budget was delivered and they went on their press coverage of deception, and they continued to criticize the budget presentation, and they spun and they wove in the most disingenuous fashion. They said that the family islands were being neglected by this PRP government. Mr. Speaker, when I heard that, I almost fell out of my chair. I couldn't believe it, because when the member for Centerville delivered his address and talked about all of the initiatives that we had for the family islands, how could that translate into there was not enough for the family islands? Mr. Speaker, there's a saying by George Bernard Shaw. It says, and I quote, "Beware of false knowledge. It is more dangerous than ignorance."
That's right.
End quote. Mr. Speaker, schools are scheduled to be built in Inagua, San Salvador, Los Andres, and Gregorytown. It is clear
this morning, presenting in the House of Assembly. They're about to begin this afternoon session. We expect that Mangrove Key and South Andros MP Ticewell Forbes will begin his presentation. So let's join them now as they begin this afternoon session here, the 2013-2014 budget debate.
Good afternoon, honorable members. Welcome back from our lunch recess. When we suspended our lunch recess, we were debating the second reading for an appropriations bill, commonly referred to as the budget debate. I believe the member for Mangrove Key and South Andros will prepare to speak, but before he does, I just wanted to share with this august body an intervention that the chair will allow at this time. During the lunch recess, the member for Fox Hill, in his capacity as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, by way of private notice, requested an opportunity from the chair to make a statement regarding the injury to the Vice Consul of the U.S. Embassy as the result of a robbery on Sunday past. I have read the communication, and I'm satisfied that in the discretion of the chair, that it should be allowed at this time, and it has merit, and it deserves the immediate intervention of this House. So the chair will at this time entertain the member for Fox Hill in that capacity, his capacity as minister. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also canvass the matter with the Leader of the House and with the Leader of the Opposition and Opposition Spokesman on Foreign Affairs during the luncheon break. Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform the House that the U.S. government informed me this morning that as a result of the injury to its Vice Consul at the U.S. Embassy, consequent upon the robbery of that individual while heading to church on Sunday, that there was an unexpected and adverse effect on visa processing in the embassy here in the Bahamas. I've previously expressed our deepest regret and concern at the matter involving the Vice Consul, and I do so again now publicly. The matter is with the police, and the investigations continue. Unfortunately, however, the embassy says that the absence from work of that officer this morning meant that no visa processing for Bahamians took place today, and the charge thought at the time of this original conversation that this would be for an unspecified period of time. I made known our concern at these developments even while understanding the situation. I'm happy now to report that I've been informed by the charge that visa processing will resume again tomorrow morning. The embassy's charge has also indicated that a statement will go out to the press today. Those who were not processed today will get a call to reschedule their appointments. Processing through the Lyndon Pindling International and Grand Bahama International airports continued without interruption today. And I will keep the House informed as events become known to us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Thank you, honourable member. And just to join the member for Fox Hill in his, when we damage ourselves, young men, when we hurt ourselves and hurt others, we bring disdain to our nation. And so from where I sit, I'd certainly like to appeal to all the young men under the sound of my voice to let us work together in harmony to build this country. We only have one country to build, and let us put our hands together and our hearts and bring relief to our people by working together to make this a better place. May God bless us all. As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Mangrove Key and South Andros.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, it is a pleasure of mine to stand here this afternoon to make a brief presentation on this compendium of appropriation bill we call the budget. And before to commence formally, I'd like to say a special good afternoon to Ms. Joyce Wallace, who's over there in High Rock, Duncombe Coppice area in South Andros, who is this afternoon, along with her daughter. She suffers from cancer, and so 3 of her daughters have also been afflicted by cancer. One of them, Zonica, a very dear friend of mine, is very low. I wanted to know that they are in our thoughts, and I want to also thank the Deputy Prime Minister who visited the community of South Andros on the weekend for finding time to do a brief, to stop by, try to pass on some words of encouragement to the family at this time. And also to Mrs. Muriel Lash in Smithsville, who's not doing very well. She is domiciled in the community in which I would have grown up in Smithsville, South Andros. And she this afternoon is listening in. almost 90 years old, but still a fighter, strong Christian woman. And I want her to know that no matter what the case may be, farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my sister. Live in the sunshine. We'll understand all by and by. Mr. Deputy, I would like to commence my contribution to the 2013-14 budget presentation by firstly acknowledging the gallant efforts of my government, headed by the hard-working and relentless efforts of the Right Honorable Member for Centerville. The Right Honorable Member noted at the outset, in presenting this year's budget, that the state of the public finances of our country, which he inherited upon coming to office, is one of concern to him, and that pulling this country out of its debilitating debt spiral was a major thrust or focus of his government. Mr. Deputy, strengthening the foundations of the Bahamian economy, securing steady growth, and facilitating the legislative policies and administrative vehicle for private sector employment creation is a key component for real growth and expansion of our economy. Before I go any further, Mr. Deputy, I must note quickly the profound pleasure of mine, and I would also like to call it a diplomatic treasure. It was to accompany the Prime Minister, the Honorable Member for Centerville, and the Member for Foxhill, my immediate boss, I would call him, a dear friend of mine, on two recent high-level visits to the Caribbean region, notably to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Firstly, to the visit of the Vice President of the USA, the Honorable Joseph Biden, and secondly, Chinese President Xi Jinping. But during these visits, Mr. Deputy, what was most profound to me, I noted that our Prime Minister was very direct with President Xi Jinping. And he noted, as he spoke to him across the table, face to face, he says, and I was kind of put it in my own kind of layman terms this afternoon. He said, we need people like you and countries such as yours to be engaged in our country. And therefore, as you think about it, and also look at the prospect of investing even further or having further developments in our country, we want you to know that you must engage our people. To me, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Perry G. Christie said these words. To me, Mr. Speaker, that was a very poignant, the Honorable Member for Centerville. An exhilarating moment for me as a Bahamian. It showed strength, grit, and fortitude. Because we know the Chinese government generally operate from the premise that if they spend their money, they're going to bring their people. The Prime Minister said to the President face to face, I would need my people to be more engaged in this process. I felt proud. Yes. Thank you, sir, to the Right Honorable Member for standing up for those young professionals, the burgeoning corporate professionals, and also for the Bahamians in this country and those who are yet unborn. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, the post-Cold War order has changed the more fundamental ways than anyone would have imagined things would have been done today. Liberalization and globalization have unleashed immense wealth across the world, aided by the free movement of ideas, capital, and technology. The emerging economic powers of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, known these days as the BRICS, have transformed the structure and anatomy of international economic relations. But globalization has also brought with it its own attendant challenges. Mr. Speaker, while developing countries such as ours have taken advantages of new opportunities opened up by the international trading and investment regime, a good number are experiencing worsening poverty indices. Global irregularities are deepening, worsened by the new challenges of climate change and increased global vulnerabilities. The global financial meltdown of autumn 2008 on Wall Street, the European nations' fiscal instability, in countries such as Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. For example, now, Mr. Speaker, we have to even go a little further and look at FATCA compliance. I know you would hear more from this from the member for Elizabeth when he presents. The EPA and the WTO agreements and compliance and regulatory regime measures are all issues that third world states, inclusive of CARICOM and the Bahamas, must contend. Mr. Speaker, the buildup in government debt in response to the recession of few years has raised a number of policy dilemmas for individual countries as well as the world as a whole, where the government fiscal stimulus was seen as necessary to restore confidence to markets and stimulate deteriorating economies in the aftermath of the Great Recession of 2008. In June 2010-2011, these fiscal stimuli, which were not always properly monitored or thought through, had run up major debts, and for many economies, it became a confidence-sapping experience. Generally for the Bahamas, though, Mr. Deputy, the prospect for the Bahamian economy, in both 2013 and 2014 remain unchanged from the projections in both last year's budget communication and the mid-year statement of this fiscal period. The IMF continues to forecast that our economy will expand by some 2.7% in real terms this year, followed by a projected 2.5% next year. Mr. Deputy, after everything that has been done and said so far, that fellow over the hill, or that young man walking in the bluff in South Andros, or maybe walking or listening right now via 1540 in Matutang in Agua, or swinging ski, back when examined with Bertram Brown just now, is simply asking that question, what's in the budget for me? Third world countries, Mr. Speaker, must be ready to meet monumental developmental challenges in an open and increasingly networked global economy. However, countries as ours also run the risk at the same time of international players with their own agendas, undermining efforts at nation building by competing for economic resources as well as for our own local political loyalties. We must be mindful of that fact, Mr. Deputy. In politics, Mr. Speaker, the United States government operates from the simple mantra, we have no friends, we have interests. And we should learn from this. They have no friends, they have interests. You heard it from the deputy, from the vice president just the other day while he was in Trinidad. Nations are forging agreements, especially bilaterally, and also concomitantly, multilaterally, with a focus of symbiotic relationships and benefits. If you were to take it down home, it simply goes this way, like they would have said back in Andros, hand go, hand come. That's the way the world is going, Mr. Deputy. And we in the Bahamas must realize this. For my people in Andros, we commend the efforts of the government, as we would have seen the various initiatives enumerated. I care to just look at a few this afternoon in a very direct way. The allocation of $2 million in this budget for the acquisition of new police vehicles in the upcoming fiscal year in an effort to provide 24-hour police presence in our society. The government has allocated $8 million to Royal Bahamas Police Force that allows its manpower to be increased by some 450 officers. And the recruitment size would grow from, instead of 30 officers, now to some 100 officers. $175 million in the modernization of the main fleet of the Defense Force to better protect our waters, borders, and marine resources, and to strengthen our capacity to respond to natural disasters. And Mr. Speaker, as a farmland island representative, and I know the member for Foxwood will also note the same, this is important to us, because after the hurricane, and sometimes the airports could be damaged, and water could be, water level could be pretty high around the airports at times. If the Defense Force would have the right kind of boats and fleet, sometimes they can go to these islands and assist in this process very quickly. and also when illegal migrants also land on our shores in these family islands, as we would have had the occasion to have many of them land, especially in South Andros and Mangrove Key more recently, and the challenge involved therewith, getting aircraft out on a timely basis to accommodate the numbers that would have landed. So with the Defense Force being strengthened, Mr. Speaker, this is a step in the right direction. $10 million to market the new Bahamas. $10 million allocated to urban renewal and small home repairs. I enumerate these things this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, in a very deliberate way. So as you look at the $10 million for small home developments, I hope these will also include the family islands like Andros. For example, Grand Bahamas benefited from much as a working and properly run urban renewal office. I'm asking for a bit of the crumb from the table in Andros, especially in Fresh Creek and also South Andros, the bigger communities, where we have all of our challenges. So all I'm saying, Mr. Deputy, my government has got to bear in mind that I have many challenges in my community of Andros. Many of my people are unemployed or underemployed. And as we now getting into the rainy season, and we would hope to see some immediate relief with repairs being done to roofs in South Andros, Mangrove Key, and also Central Andros. $30 million for construction of new primary and secondary schools in Inagua, San Salvador, Gregory Town, and Losang. I must quickly note as I move on to the other parts of my presentation, Mr. Deputy, my government, before we would have demitted office in 2007, would have agreed to the construction of a primary school in Fresh Creek. I note that Fresh Creek is not on the list this time, but next year I would anticipate being added to that list of new primary schools to be constructed in the family islands. Many hospitals, in Saudi Lutra and Cat Island, $4 million establishment of the agricultural school in North Andros, $10 million for construction and multi-sporting facilities in the family islands to assist with youth and cultural development. And I must just shoot a little arrow across the bow to the member for Carmichael, who has some ties to the community of South Andros proper, through some familial ties to that community of South Andros. I wanted to know that as he is out there and looking to do some construction of gymnasium in the family islands, that Brother James Pratt in South Andros, who's listening just now, would have sent a very lovely note for him to note. And we'll also want to be considered among those numbers when those saints are marching into the beautiful gymnasium. We'd like to have one, at least somewhere in the constituency of South Andros, but especially the area of South Andros proper, who's been asking for it. Was a very, very well-structured basketball tournament. And many years I would have watched Danny and the boys having to have that tournament on the outside where the mosquitoes would affect them, or when the rain falls, the games have to stop. And we also anticipate some relief in that regard. The establishment of the National Training Agency to equip Bahamians with necessary practical competencies and skills. $10 million budgeted for housing repairs under urban renewal to employ our young men, which is much needed. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend these, along with many other initiatives, to still be announced by my government. As I hasten on, Mr. Deputy, on this nice and calm afternoon here in the capital city, after returning from South Andros and homecoming for the weekend, you treasure the moments now in the family islands when you can go to sleep and very comfortable. The only thing to bother you may be one little mosquito or sandfly now and then. But you don't have to worry about gunshots and being robbed. Criminal and antisocial behavior is a major concern in our country today, Mr. Deputy. As a matter of fact, it is not unique to us. This is a global phenomenon this afternoon. In many countries, people are caught between corrupt elites and powerful extremists, promising salvation or material benefits from criminality and political violence. This is the case in large parts in the Americas, Eurasia, Africa, and the Middle East. Mrs. Deputy, there's no quick fix or panacea to this challenge. For years, we believed that elections in democracy would be adequate to produce economic development, social justice, and stability. However, this is proving not to be quite that simple, and some are losing hope in everyday governance every day. The culture of lawlessness is covertly seeping into our psyche. To change this trajectory and to embrace the effort of change, the golden generation and other young persons like myself and those younger are now challenged, and they are also losing hope in many of our institutions, especially in areas and issues related to crime. Citizens, the church, civil society, and the government must believe that they have a personal stake in upholding the rule of law and preventing crime and corruption in the Bahamas today. They need to share the expectations that law ought to be fair and apply to everyone across the board, regardless of one's socioeconomic status, and that every individual has a role in creating and overseeing the protection and preservation of our society. Mr. Deputy, high unemployment is almost a certain path to social upheavals and crime. Poverty, social problems such as gambling, dishonest employees, bribery, theft, political instabilities, exploitation of labor, the list goes on. There is no need for any anecdotal evidence here. We all know the story. The devil will always find something for idle hands to do. We must find a way to correct these challenges. But it would only happen through a collective will, where we all come together and say, enough is enough. And we together, no matter rich or poor, black or white, we would turn a new page today. Mr. Deputy, an effective educational system over the years, which has failed to respond to intergenerational gaps, which simply imparts, for the most part, general and literary education, devoid of any practical content, is a recipe for the society we have today. But I must also publicly commend the effort of the member for Marathon and the staff within the Ministry of Education, also the Department of Education, for the yeoman's task that they've done amidst all the challenges in our country with our young people. I could never forget hearing this statement some years ago by former Senator John Lee Ferguson, and it stuck in my ears from the days when I would have been on radio when he came on Focal Point, and there was some lawyers who came on before him, and there's a medical crew that came in earlier, and he said, that was stuck in my mind, education is a lifelong process, but it all begins with teaching, because teaching is the profession of professions. It all starts there. It all starts here. Education is the base. We must get it right. So therefore, education in the 21st century, Mr. Deputy, must be learning-centered. It must also be affordable, where young people, as I return to my community this Thursday of South Andros, to my alma mater, South Andros High School, for the annual graduation exercise. Many of these young people would do well again. Come out of school. Many of them don't have many options out there. So many times they would apply to enter the defense force or the police force, customs immigration. And many times just being in New Providence is a challenge for them. And this is the plight of my people. Many have to come to New Providence and barely get by living with the auntie or the uncle or some cousin, And if nothing can come from your grandmother or your mother back in Andros on the captain box or the plane to pay towards that rent, your life is most miserable. This is real stuff for family island people. I see this when I return to my island community. Even when it comes to medical care and attention, the same is the challenge. So today I smiled as I celebrated the member for Saudi Lutra, Southern Century Lutra, as he talked about having a mini hospital in Saudi Lutra. And he mentioned the fact that had it been constructed, and running proficiently, well, someone's life would have been saved. I noted as he made his comment, I said, Lord, all I need in South Andros is a doctor. But he asking for a hospital. But such is life. Such is life. I am challenged, and so is my people with that. Lifelong learning should be interactive and also collaborative. Diverse, intelligent, and adaptive. Mr. Speaker, I made the point about a medical officer being attached to South Andros. It's a very serious point. We have trained many doctors. I had a chance to be at the university campus in Trinidad at St. Augustine just a few days ago. The minister, who was just there, also met with the students while I sat to the meeting. We have over 100 students who are studying to be medical doctors. Many of these students, upon returning to the country, want to stay in New Providence. And all we are saying to those people and the powers that be, persons cannot be trained by the Bahamian people, taxpayers' dollars. And when you come to New Providence, you can determine where you want to work or not. That can't be fair to the folks in the Family Islands. That cannot be fair. When a doctor who just passed out, as we say within the Bahamian vernacular, just pass out to determine they're not going to South Andros. And we pay their school fee, and we train them, and they can determine they're not going to go, and I got to be calling back and forth. Something is wrong with that system, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Deputy, I salute my government on the National Training Agency as practical competencies and skills are needed to meet the current and future working and finding employment in our community. It is my hope that this National Training Agency will be fully extended to the Family Islands and not done so in a facadial way.
Dr. Swami was the last one, and that's 3 years ago.
Almost, thank you very much, Makal. It's almost 3 years ago since.
Make sure that they don't laugh.
Yeah, a doctor's not. No, this is no new development.
Members.
We have not had a doctor domiciled in that community almost 2.5 years or more.
That's right.
And this is a challenge that we've been facing under both administrations. I would also note, Mr. Speaker, that this afternoon that I have had my challenges with and listened to the comments about the 52-week program and also what it would have done for the Family Islands and also maybe here in New Providence. I must say to Mr. Deputy, that we in South Andros could use the extension of this program, sir. This program might have had its genesis in political opportunism and also might have cost me some votes in the last election. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the 52-week program kept people in South Andros. Mr. Speaker, I know it was not always properly monitored, but the fact of the matter is, some of these same persons who made those couple dollars in South Andros under this program are now in New Providence looking for a better way of life. So then I look at my island communities. I drove around just this weekend in Smithsville, a dying community. Kemps Bay, once the capital of South Andros, with maybe less than 70 persons. And now those numbers have even dropped because the program has come to an end. Mr. Speaker, we don't have all the opportunities as the folks who might be the citizens here in New Providence. We had some people, I mentioned the fact, some of the people, most of the persons here in New Providence might have an option for another job. I am saying to our people in the Family Islands, the option is not there. And when the program is offered, some of our people, through that program, were able to remain in our local community and basically survive because they made a little something while they were in South Andros. Today, they are challenged. Also, Mr. Deputy, we're hopeful for the Solar Verde Group who wants to invest in South Andros, and if Mr. Norbert Ramming, who has invested his entire life in that community, is committed to the effort, I too would have to buy in. Mr. Ramming has lived his life, he and all those who remain there, in no small way, in keeping the community going over the years. No matter what may go or come, Norbert Ramming remain in South Andros. The same way we would have looked at the I Group in Meguana and McAllen and gave them an opportunity. All I'm saying to my government, give the Solar Verde Group a chance to look at South Andros, whatever the conditions may be. Give them a chance to invest, because the chance of having real investment in South Andros is small. And therefore, I am saying to our people, and my government, pardon me, to look at this group. And we must say that we should give our people in the community of South Andros a chance to, by allowing this company to be approved to invest and build our community. We are also anticipating the sale, the Emerald Palm Hotel, joint venture agreement with the Lighthouse Club, because our people need help. Basic developments such as the ATM machines at the Bank of the Bahamas and South Andros and Mangrove Key would be most helpful, because if we were to have incidents or someone for unforeseen circumstances during the evening times or night time in the community, and persons have to leave the following morning, they cannot access funding because the banks are closed X amount of days a week, and it is staggered. We need full banking weeks in the community of South Andros, Mr. Speaker, namely Mangrove Key and South Andros. We are anticipating the roadworks in Central Andros, and Mr. Basil Nemore and the efforts he's given to that community. We anticipate that he would be the one chosen to continue to work, as we look forward to our young people being given opportunities, because Mr. Nemore is one who gives back to the community. Mr. Speaker, slow growth in the tertiary sector, namely commerce, trade, and transportation, is still limited and has not provided employment for the existing labor force. And now we see new applicants, especially in Andros, whose licenses for tour operators, taxis, and business licenses, in all the cases have not been processed. And we continue to hear still about the moratorium on taxi licenses. And I must note that we've heard of some progress in this regard, but members on this weekend still were concerned about it. I told her I'd express their view. But I'm hopeful, after speaking with the minister, to all my people in Andros, those that I didn't speak with in Central Andros in particular, who are very concerned about this, that there is now real hope, and this matter should be remedied pretty shortly. Also, Mr. Speaker, I would also hope that we will continue to quickly process work permits for those who are challenged with these matters in our community. And also trade legislation and agreements will continue to be passed that will make us competitive in a challenging business community and world. The delay of cottage and small-scale industries must be noted. The honorable member for Tall Pines and others joined me some years ago while I worked in the media on a campaign called the Buy Bahamian campaign. And also, many times they were challenged and sometimes scoffed at, and products were put on second rows on back shelves, and he along with Ms. Barnett and others would have, Mr. Piper, I remember very well, spoken to these concerns. The member for South Abaco must also be mentioned here, for he has solely and sometimes against all odds persisted, especially when we look at traditional handicraft, and has led to its survival over the years. Although it provides minimal employment in Andros, the Berry Islands, Abaco, the Exuma Keys, and Lutra, I want to thank South Abaco for its efforts in this regard. Unfortunately, most rural traditional crafts have been ruined or faded out partly due to the unfavorable bias policies of our merchant classes, our outside investor groupings, and or through the process of manipulation and coercion. The original craft and artistry suffer in major resorts and points of entry and exit. And therefore, in many instances, they're just barely surviving. And I call on my good friend, the hard-working member for West End and Bimini, to continue to work on this one and to fix it, to give our artisans and craft personnel a real chance. And I know Emily Ramming and members of SAMA have all confidence that the member for West End and Bimini would be able to fix it. He's the kind of man who will get it done. He has taken over the tiller in tourism, and we could already feel the difference, what he and the life he has brought to the tourism market. And the Bahamas' record is now being returned as we look at the tourism market and also the new numbers that are coming into our society. Mr. Speaker, many family islanders have been university educated and would like to return to the island of their birth. But another hurdle that exists for these young people is that of employment opportunities for self-employment in rural or developing family island communities. Like other developing countries, most of our engineers, technocrats, and other well-qualified persons don't possess ample means of self-employment. They then, when faced with the challenge of having to pay real bills and take care of themselves and their family, they have to go and look for paid, or what we call in the Bahamian society, a government job. This is what we face today. Mr. Speaker, quickly, I must look at the banking sector in the Bahamas today. And given the significant and persistent underprovision of credit to the private sector at the aggregate level, analysis of the real growth of customer loans to enterprise and households by individual banks can help to identify a range of factors associated with banking development in transition economies like ours. The observed rate of real growth in outstanding customer loans reflects the interaction over time of the demand for banking loans and their supply by individual institutions. Factors at the country level that are likely to influence the real demand for bank loans by customers, that is enterprises and households, are the growth of output and the competing demands for domestic savings by the government. The demand for investment in consumer durable goods and the debt carrying capacity of the various enterprises and households are likely to increase with output and incomes and to increase with competing demand for finance by government. Therefore, the response of banks to the demand for loans is, and in turn, likely to be influenced by a number of country-level factors, Mr. Deputy, such as the confidence of the depositors in banks and the protection of credit rights. Both tend to increase with measures of progress in banking and enterprise reforms. Observable factors at the level of individual banks, such as size, extent of competitive pressure, for example, market shares, bank capitalization, and the nature of ownership, privatized or state-owned, with or without major foreign participation, may also influence the supply response in a local society. This brings me, Mr. Speaker, to the real-life situation in the Bahamas today. Mr. Deputy, a whole lot has been said in recent days about the 3% business license fee that banks must now pay. I know the comments of former Chamber of Commerce President, Mr. Dionisio de Aguilar, stating that, and I note, that RBC, First Caribbean CIBC, Scotiabank, etc., had been exceptionally poor in allowing Bahamians to buy into their local subsidiaries as shareholders. For example, and I note, that CIB First Caribbean Bank generated, according to my sources, some $167.9 million in interest and similar income last year, and an operating income of some $171.975 million. A 3% tax on either side of these would generate between $5.04 to $5.16 million for the Treasury. And on fiscal matters, since we're dealing with those matters, I would like to commend publicly Mr. William Sands, as he's been returned as the chairman to Commonwealth Bank, a good friend of mine, and also Mr. Franklin R. Wilson, a mentor and a friend, advisor to many on financial matters. Mr. Wilson gives back to this community daily, many times than one person to know he would have given. And I want to say thanks to him openly and publicly for giving and assisting those who many times are challenged and disenfranchised in our society. Thank you to you both, gentlemen. This year, our country will be celebrating 40 years of political independence. And I note post-haste that the banking challenges of the Bahamas today is one that we are still very concerned about. What is happening today in our society is what Somalo Butler and others fought against over 40-odd years ago. How many Bahamian officials in the higher echelon or executive stream in these banks are really leveling and understanding the challenges of the everyday person who they would have some basic contact with when they go to Evensong at St. Agnes, or maybe at St. Gregory's, or go to a good service at the Church of God, which somebody called the Jumper Church, or maybe go to a Sabbath service at Grandstang over the hill, or maybe go to roads in the valley. We can look at the foreclosure reports, especially on mortgages in more recent years. And during these tough, financially challenging times, and the banks, according to reports, have generally been not very accommodating or empathetic to the financial challenges of Bahamians. Most Bahamians during their lifetime, Mr. Deputy, and this is real, this is down home real, would only pay for 2 used cars and pay for a house until they 65 years or older. That's the reality we face today. With all this money in this country and all the good that has happened in our economy, generally Bahamians would pay for, I got some good sources, 2 used cars in their lifetime and pay for a home via mortgage until they're 65 years or older. Bahamians who get this opportunity to serve in these senior executive posts, generally it is said through outright acts or policy initiatives, it is alleged, make life difficult for the possibilities of success by young or prospective entrepreneurs. Success in small investments is few and far in between. Imagine a young professional who would have just a few months ago gone into the bank with a great proposal and a great idea, and he's asked by a senior banking official, "You sure you want to do this?" It is alleged that you would then hear of some special interest group or some other moneyed friends, for example, some weeks or months later, starting your idea of bringing it to fruition, the same ideas you presented to the banks just a few weeks or months ago. Your innovation, your dream, your idea, progressive plan for Charlotte, gone down the drain. Gone. These officials are still getting opportunities those who come into our country and work in these banks, where we would have lost all the strength we would have had, that Somalia and others would have fought for. These have now been sapped from many Bahamian banking officials and those in the financial world, and are now been given to expatriates, when Bahamians for the most part still doing the job. Mr. Speaker, we still live in a society as we celebrate 40 years of independence. And you heard the member for Fox Hill, my mentor, he and the member for Bain and Grandstang, you know, I have a special, he and the member for Bain and Grandstang are very special to me when it comes to me learning some things. And member for Fox Hill has shown me how to be sober. And when it comes to the diplomatic world, he has that decorum, and he brings a level of, I like this word, equanimity to the table that is unmatched. So therefore, here we are today in the Bahamas 40 years later, as we get set for independence and to be celebrating here in Rosen Square. People are still judging Bahamians according to how they look, how they speak, if you're light or you're white, according to which church you go to in the Bahamas today. This is real. Are you a lodge member? Which church you go to? These are still factors that are determining access for everyday Bahamian. How could the young man in Odell Corner get a chance? How could the young fellow in Ludlow Street get an opportunity? This is where we are. I'm not even talking with the Family Island young fellow back in San Salvador, in Major's Key. This is where we are today, Mr. Speaker. These are still hindrances. We still operate for the most part in a very effective mode of interaction, access, opportunity, or simply being given a chance in this society. We need to look at our people and citizens more holistically. Let's build a better country with our differences making us stronger. We in this House of Assembly, Mr. Speaker, are no different. And I can note this as the member for Bain and Grandstang looks on. If a lady said to me just the other day, and Weston, I'm glad you were also listening closely. She says, in the House of Assembly, I'm glad the Speaker's not here, you might stop me after this intervention, that even in the House of Assembly, you all have separate but not equal. I said, what do you mean by that? She said, listen when your cousin David calls to register. That's what you mean by that. He says, Dr. Nottage, Dr. Minnis. Then he says, A. Forbes, P. Forbes. I said, I never thought about that. She says, all he's saying there, and this is an educated woman, she is saying that even there, the House of Assembly has not gotten itself together because you're all members in the Honorable House. So some are called Doctor, and others are just called A. Forbes and P. Forbes. But I'm a hometown boy, it's okay with me. So let's remove these little small things we have. Show respect, love, and ambivalence, and real love, and remove the ambivalence towards one another. That's fine with me. That's fine. Mr. Speaker, like the Apostle Paul, finally, my brethren and sisters, it's important for us now to focus on the commitment to and the measurement of change that merely we've heard being talked about for years in our country. We observe one Bahamas. We'll be observing majority rule next year, and independence we're going to be celebrating just a few days from now. It is my hope that these interests and commitments to change and being one people are secured in here and lived out there in the wider Bahamian society.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, many of the challenges, ideas, and truths we speak about are universal. and our people should not merely hear them repeated ad nauseum, but should identify and contextualize these challenges and focus on overcoming them. Mr. Deputy, let me state unequivocally that public service is a calling and a responsibility. It is a choice that is exercised. We choose to serve and accept that we will forego certain liberties and comforts, or we can enter the private sector in pursuit of simple wealth. But we decided, Carmichael, that we will serve, so we can do both. Under the strong and effective leadership of the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, supported by a committed cabinet, our country has weathered many storms. Our government should be focused on the growth for the greater good. Therefore, Mr. Deputy, growth requires investment, and investment requires demand. This budget faces up to the demand challenge of our Bahamas today. It promotes further opening of our economy. It makes bold adjustment to policies so that it promotes rather than inhibit growth and social justice. It announces institutional reforms too, and further embed efficiency and good governance. The Budget 2013 recognizes that the need to facilitate the rising trend of women seeking employment, and will try to break the vicious circle for our youths, especially in employment-related areas. We must assist our young people. This budget also, Mr. Deputy, goes to the root of poverty and deals with its painful manifestation. We know that poverty is a difficult, multifaceted scourge. It is not only a problem of material well-being, but of human dignity as well. This is why we will mobilize as a government through this budget maximum efforts to face it head-on. Mr. Speaker, the bar has been set by the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, assisted by the Right Honourable Member for Golden Isles. It has
Honourable
been set,
Member for Golden Isles.
the member for Golden Isles. The bar has been set, Mr. Speaker. When I competed in high jump back in the community of South Andros at the all-age school in my earlier days, I would have done the dive. I couldn't do the Frostbury flop, or I did the scissors. But the bar has been set. The member for Golden Isles is young and bright and energetic, and he has the astute input and leadership of the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, who is now the crown prince of this honourable place. The bar has been set for strong growth, for us to ride out the crisis, improve social protection generally, and fiscal reform. In closing, therefore, Mr. Speaker, let us commit ourselves to strengthening that which is good, and that which is focused on measurable improvements in the quality of life and service for all Bahamians. More importantly, let us carry ourselves with pride and knowledge that we are the servants of our people. I am glad the member for Golden Isles would have entered this honorable place as I'm about to take my seat. As a good Church of God man, and my daughter sang so well yesterday in East Street, Lily the Valley Corner, there's a song that goes, I didn't have a chance to sing it for the Deputy Prime Minister while he visited South Andros this weekend. It's called Well Done, My Child. That's one of those songs from the old church hymnal. Well done, my child. The Honorable Nico Granville know this one. My Lord would say, with courage bold you stood for the right. Well done, my child. Well done. So therefore, Mr. Deputy, let us build a better people. Let us build a better community. Let us together and collectively build a better Bahamas. Mr. Deputy, I'm much obliged, and I support the established legislation.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for North Eleuthera. South Eleuthera, sorry.
South Abaco.
South Abaco, sorry.
You want to put me in the north, too?
You need a good man. You need a good man.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. The Deputy, I rise to make my contribution to this year's budget debate. But firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the wonderful people, of Central South Abaco for their many years of support and confidence in my leadership as their representative. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased that if I lived to see this 5-year period up, I would have put 20 years in this honorable house. Plus another 10 years in the upper house.
Wow, 30.
So I would have put in 30 years. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased with my performance and on both sides. I've been on both sides. And I give credit to both governments.
Yes.
And I can look at my constituency, Mr. Speaker, and I can point out from North Island all the way around to Wanakee. And I can show you beautiful developments that have taken place during this time. Mr. Speaker, just a little bit more would have been one of the founding fathers of this nation. Before independence, I was there. I was in the struggle, in the battle, and I'm very proud that I've been a part of that, bringing the nation, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, into being. Like all budget speeches, Mr. Speaker, this one was hopeful too. It is very important, Mr. Speaker, that this hope is not allowed to die. I will not attempt to cover all aspects of the budget communication, Mr. Speaker. However, there are some aspects of it that I want to address. Mr. Speaker, there are many serious challenges facing our country. Let us not fool ourselves. These are not problems with a ready set of solutions. I will not spend any time assessing which individual or group of individuals should carry the greater part of the blame for the situation we now find ourselves in. Mr. Deputy, we need solutions and we need results. Many Bahamians may be as nationalistic as I am, but I can assure you, Mr. Deputy, there is no Bahamian more nationalistic than me. I wanted to say that, Mr. Deputy, so that it would be understood by all the reason why it is so important to me that the government succeeds in its efforts to grapple with the serious challenges facing this nation. We cannot politicize the issues, Mr. Speaker. The problems we are facing are too important to be kicked around as a political football. This is why I am prepared to offer every possible assistance I can in every possible area that I can, Mr. Deputy. The problems we are facing in this country need a concerted effort from the government and the opposition. Some problems are more complex than others, Mr. Deputy. There are some simple problems with simple solutions. Mr. Deputy, the Bahamas is a very vulnerable area where it needs not be, in areas where it need not be. We need to start working out our own salvation in this very important area. Successive governments have known that the potential for catastrophe in this area are great. Successive governments have talked about it, but successive governments have failed to adequately address the problem. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, we have had ample time and all of the information we needed to deal with this problem. It is unfortunate that we continue for so long making only incremental steps towards so important a solution. Mr. Deputy, there is no security as vital as food security. I don't need to demonstrate that for anyone in this Parliament. This truth is self-evident. I am happy to see that in this year's budget, we are again promising to move in this direction. Mr. Deputy, we need to keep agriculture going in this country, and I cannot stress that too strongly. There is so much we can do in this vital area of our economy. And Mr. Deputy, I am talking about an undertaking in which you cannot lose. Mr. Deputy, I remember a time when all of our islands were once farming communities. There is more than enough arable land in the Bahamas to feed not only our entire population, but also our visitors while they are in our country. Yes. This was not always the case, Mr. Deputy, but there has been great technological and scientific advances in the science of farming. Mr. Deputy, you can now grow almost anything, almost anywhere. But, Mr. Deputy, even without all of the scientific knowledge, we have our own very best farming asset just off the west coast of Nassau. Mr. Deputy, Andros has explosive potential. It is the island that represents our country's absolute best choice for food security. Mr. Deputy, I was pleased to see plans in this year's budget for a School of Agriculture in North Andros. During my tenure as Executive Chairman of the Bahamas Agricultural and Industrial Corporation, I took the President of the College of the Bahamas and colleagues to North Andros with the same idea in mind. It was a great idea then, and it is a great idea now. Mr. Deputy, I really and sincerely hope to see this effort carried through in pursuit of its true potential. North Andros has everything to create a great farming community. First of all, it has more land than any other island in the Bahamas. Indeed, Mr. Deputy, there are only 3 islands in the Caribbean larger than the island of Andros. And Andros has large, uninterrupted scopes of land. It is easy to survey the land and apportion it in a way so as to get the best possible result. Andros has many other attributes that makes it conducive to farming.
Members, please.
Mr. Speaker,
Sit down a little.
Mr. Deputy, it also has great farming soil and an abundant supply of fresh water. When you are thinking about farming, Mr. Deputy, Andros has everything. Mr. Deputy, if the government approaches this venue in the right way, it will yield a bountiful harvest in a variety of ways. Mr. Deputy, the global meltdown of 2008 did one good thing for the Bahamas. It forced the Bahamas to face certain facts. The challenges now facing this country are being headed our way for a very long time. 2008 only sped up the process. As a result of the world economic meltdown, the Bahamas is now experiencing its highest rate of unemployment for many decades. The new thrust of the government, Mr. Deputy, and I have no reason not to believe the government's sincerity, will accomplish a number of positive things. Agriculture has the potential of creating
25,000 direct jobs, Mr. Deputy. And with 25,000 direct jobs will create another 25,000 spin-off jobs. Mr. Deputy, when you take this into consideration, you immediately begin to see the potential reduction in the unemployment statistics of the Bahamas. Mr. Deputy, Bahamians import approximately $1 billion worth of food into the Bahamas every year. And Mr. Deputy, this food is not the best for human consumption because of other countries who grow this food with chemicals that have been banned for a long time. In many cases, what we are importing is food that have already been declared unfit for consumption in the very country from which we import them. Mr. Speaker, we have a tremendous amount of cancer. Women with breast cancer, with prostate cancer, men, and all forms of cancer. And we wonder why. It could be that we are eating food with all of these chemicals that are slowly killing all of us. So what are we doing, Mr. Speaker? We are spending top dollar for food that is not fit for human consumption. Something is wrong with this, Mr. Speaker. Why do that when we can grow the highest quality food for our own consumption? I know that Bahamians are fond of blaming the politicians for what goes wrong in the Bahamas. But, Mr. Deputy, this problem is a direct result of the faulty thinking of Bahamians. Mr. Deputy, I don't know why it is that Bahamians seem to believe that anything that is foreign is better than its counterpart that is Bahamian. If we start to change the way we think, Bahamians would immediately begin to eat more healthy. In this regard, Mr. Deputy, I wish to commend Mr. Rupert Roberts, owner of Super Value chain of stores, for his foresight in supporting the Bahamian farmers in purchasing and offering these top quality products to the Bahamian consumer. Mr. Deputy, if all of the food chains would follow suit, like Mr. Rupert Roberts, we wouldn't have to worry about food security because we would have more farmers growing food for the local consumption. Getting back to imports, what is astonishing, Mr. Deputy, is how this whole import business is set up. The foods we import are coming from several countries. So, Deputy, we are eating foods that are being grown in Costa Rica, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and indeed Haiti, and elsewhere in the Caribbean. And while this is not a bad thing, the point I wish to make is that we are not importing directly. Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is importing through purveyors in South Florida. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, why would intelligent people do that? It seems to me, Mr. Deputy, that it would be a lot more sensible to buy directly from these countries. It certainly would be a lot cheaper. But I say again, Mr. Deputy, we can grow these things ourselves. Amen. We do not have an absolute need to import these foods. All you have to do is look at the quality of the produce in the food stores and then look at the quality of the same produce that is grown locally. There is simply no comparison. And Mr. Deputy, and you know what? The Deputy, the only thing missing from the equation is the lack of education on the part of our people. We think that everything we buy it's foreign. Our housewives are taught to, if it's foreign, it's better. But this way, our farmers are not getting the support that they need. So if our housewives would, and people who buy from the food stores would consider buying, looking at these products and buy Bahamian, because they're there. During the season when we grow vegetables and so on, the market sometimes even gets glutted, and farmers lose their produce because we're not supporting the farmers and Bahamian locally grown food. We need to change the way we think and the way we buy. Whatever the policy restrictions, the government needs to change them and allow Bahamians to go directly to the suppliers and buy for themselves. This would represent a tremendous amount of savings for the Bahamian economy. And while we're looking at putting a huge dent in our unemployment figure, Mr. Deputy, there are many ways to combat these economic woes. These woes we are sustaining. But we must not get too bogged down in the academics of it. We need a good blend of academic and the practical. We cannot afford to simply look good on paper, Mr. Deputy. This will not do. Furthermore, it will only fool people for so long. Right now, Bahamians are fed up because they are catching up with the tricks of rhetoric that have been played on them for so many years and decades. What is interesting here, Mr. Deputy, is that North Andros and Abaco can produce food self-sufficiency in some areas almost immediately. But for this to work, the profession needs a hand up from the government together with private sector partnership. The Deputy, what needs to happen is this. The government needs to assist the agricultural industry by building modern packing houses with refrigerated facilities. Once this is done, then we can employ the evaporation techniques. We can employ the evaporation techniques, and what I mean by that, Mr. Deputy, is in Andros over the before I left from BAIC, we were producing some 30 to 40,000 sacks of onions. But there's no evaporation system and no refrigeration. So if they take the moisture out of the onions and put them into refrigeration, they could grow hundreds of thousands of sacks of onions, put them in refrigeration, and we would have onions almost to last year round. But these onions could last for 3, 4, 5 months once you evaporate, take the moisture out, and put them in refrigeration. So this is the direction we need to move in. The new technology allows for onions to be dehydrated, Mr. Speaker. And it can also be applied to Irish potatoes, sweet, without the evaporation. The refrigeration then, we can have Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, cassava, yams, pumpkins, corn, peas, beans, you name it, we can have it in refrigeration. And we can also move into the area of packing houses and modern cannery facilities for food processing. Mr. Speaker, all of these things that we import, we could be producing. And when I say 25,000 people, it sounds like a lot of people. But if you add modern packing houses and canneries in every island, we would be exporting food. You'd have hundreds of women working in these canneries. And Mr. Speaker, back in the 50s, back in Abaco, we had a operation out of South Florida, and they grew something like 3,000 acres of pineapples. You look at pineapples, we can only grow pineapples in Eleuthera. Not so. Long Island? Long Island, we grow sweet ones. But these pineapples were the same type and quality that they grow in Costa Rica, the big ones you see in the in the store, and they had a modern cannery. They had a quota that they had to fill through Dole. They gave them a contract, and we were shipping pineapples packed in the cans, the donuts, the crushed, the cube juice with the Dole wrappers on the can, and they went out of Abaco by the tens of thousands of cases. Now, if it could be done back in the 50s, we must be able to do it today. So what is wrong? They had a contract to do tomato products. For Hunt, I think it was Hunt's Tomatoes. And we shipped out all tomato products, from tomato paste to make tomato juice and all works into the United States. So if we get into this across the board, Mr. Speaker, we would have an industry equal to tourism, but or maybe larger, and then we wouldn't be so dependent. Yes. We're too dependent. We need to get independent. That's right. We've been independent since 1973, but we're still so dependent. I mean, all our foods are imported. And I said he was hostage. I believe the minister has good intentions now to move agriculture forward. And for whatever advice I can give you, I'd be happy to do that. He will be hired in July. This is what I've been speaking. You don't need him. You need him because you ain't doing it. Well, what is good about this, Mr. Speaker, is that all of
Members
these things
remind you that the number
can be grown locally.
Central and South Africa has the floor.
But presently, we are importing all of these products. I'm a politician. Mr. Speaker, I fully support the government's proposal to expand the agricultural sector with training. As I said before, our people need training. There is much that Bahamians can do on their own, Mr. Deputy, but our competitors are training their people, and the Bahamas needs to follow suit and catch up. If we did not think to do it before now, there is no excuse why we should not be doing it now, that we know what our competitors are doing. Yes. We're taking in all the good dollars from tourism and sending them to Mexico and Costa Rica and Dominican Republic and all of these places. So all we're doing, a lot of times I hear fellas talking about slave days. We are still in slave days. We are slave to these countries. Every cent we make, we send it back there. Yeah. When these monies could be employing thousands of our people. Mr. Speaker, but our competitors, they're doing very well. We must train and we must expose our people to what they are up against. With the new technology, Mr. Speaker, we do not have to worry too much about spoilage. The Prime Minister also mentioned sisal as a product for the craft market. Sisal. This will put another dent in our unemployment figures. Mr. Speaker, sisal is almost an entirely lost art in the Bahamas. It is truly a shame that we allowed a craft that was a good revenue stream for the Bahamas for generations to completely or almost completely die out. Yes, Mr. Speaker, sisal is good for making craft. I don't know if you are aware, you're probably too young, Mr. Speaker, but sisal was the source of a very important industry in the Bahamas. Sisal was used to make rope for many years in the Bahamas, Mr. Deputy. All of the fishermen in bygone years used sisal rope exclusively. But these days, every rope in the Bahamas has been imported. But, Mr. Deputy, it is not too late. There are still persons alive who know the art and can teach it. Mr. Deputy, when I was a boy, my father used to make rope. Spun from yarn. Nights he would sit down and we'd all help him to spin this yarn, sisal. And then he had these gadgets that you had to spin and make rope. And we can do it today. All we need to do, Mr. Speaker, sisal can again become a rope-making industry. The first step is to provide 100 acres of land for sisal growing. Sisal is a native plant. It grows naturally. I have some in my yard in Abaco. Beautiful. Mr. Deputy, I believe that the government is serious about training. I just wish to advise the government to choose experts to train our people. Practice makes perfect, provided it is perfect practice. Mr. Speaker, we need to get over this thing about bringing in people, and every time someone comes in, they're taking somebody's job. We need to bring in experts to train our people. Otherwise, we're going to go nowhere. The first day I went to school, I didn't know A from B and nothing else. But when I left, I could read and write. So we need to train our people. You know, the experts are out there. Bring them in, train our people, and eventually the knowledge that's passed on, we'll be able to pass it on to the next generation. And we will be in the Bahamas will be in better shape for it. Mr. Speaker, I do believe that this test acreage can be done on the island of Abaco, where the craft is still a little bit alive. Mr. Deputy, another arm of agricultural equation is our fishing industry. This is another major industry. Bahamians' fishing export amounts to some $80 million per year, maybe more. I'm talking about the lobster industry alone. But, Mr. Deputy, this is not a bad figure. But, Mr. Deputy, we can do so much more. The Deputy, the more Bahamians need to be educated to see the fishing industry for the revenue-generating giant that it is. More of our people need to be trained in the more sophisticated and efficient fishing techniques that are being used by the more advanced countries. I would like to encourage our fishermen and the ministry and the minister to get involved in deep sea fishing. This type of fishing is done at a depth of anywhere between 500 feet and 2,000 feet in the ocean. This is done by electric reels, and Mr. Speaker, air fishermen will fish for red snapper and ocean grouper. These ocean grouper go up to a weight of some 80 pounds. I caught one that weighed almost 80 pounds. And the red snapper at a depth will grow up to 15 to 20 pounds. And there are millions of pounds of these fish out there. This is an area that we haven't even tapped into. And it's something that wouldn't be seasonal. It would be year-round. If we could encourage and train our people, our fishermen, to have hundreds of boats out there fishing year-round, whenever the weather's good, and it would bring in probably more money than the lobster industry, and it would create hundreds and hundreds of jobs. So this is not a bad thing, Mr. Minister. I want to encourage you to get those people fishing. And this will represent a new addition to the fishing industry. Mr. Deputy, just like I said, it will create hundreds of jobs. And with the technique multiple fish are caught simultaneously. Because the lines, you have many hooks on the line, and it's all done with electric wheels. You press a button and pull your fish up. It's very easy and very simple, but we need to get, Minister, once we could get hundreds of boats out there fishing, this thing with fillet red snapper, that brings the same price as lobster. And we could be
500 feet.
500 to 2,000 feet. There's millions and millions of snapper out there. We need to teach and educate our fishermen in this advanced technology, Mr. Deputy. I believe that we can double our exports in less than 5 years if we do this. While I'm on the subject of fisheries, a point was made, and maybe the minister could clarify this for me, at a recent town hall meeting in Marsh Harbor by fisheries officers, that there might be some consideration by the Department of Fisheries to impose a license fee for anyone wanting to fish, even if only to catch a meal for the family.
No, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Mike Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the government of which I'm a part has not given consideration, and I have not made a request for it to give consideration to licensing people to catch a meal of fish. I'm not sure why anybody from the ministry would advance that thinking. At the moment, sports fishermen who come to our shores are allowed to get legally 10 pounds of fish for food. That has not been questioned or thought of to be disallowed. But to say that they would be licensed to catch a meal of fish, I'm not sure where that came from. I would like to disabuse the members' thinking in that regard. But I also know, Mr. Speaker, while I'm at it, the government will certainly be asked to consider ensuring that those who are given sports license to do what they request to do not break our laws and catch more than the allotted amount. Because we have good information that those who come as sports fishermen are now getting more fish than is allowed by law, and they are taking out in coolers. And they should not be allowed to do that. And we are certainly going to clamp down on those lawbreakers that get more than the law presently permit them to get as sports fishermen for food. And so maybe that's what they ought to have said, and that's the message I want to send out. We will not allow people who come under the disguise of sports fishing to use it for commercial reasons. And I can also tell you that I'll be speaking to it, if the time permits me when I do speak to this issue, and I'll go a little further in saying that the bone fishing industry is going to be carefully examined so that those foreigners who come, again, under the disguise of sports fishing, they bring their own guides from wherever they come from, and they use them to the elimination of all local Bahamian guides. That's not going to be allowed to happen. So when I speak to it, I'm hoping that I will be able to say a few things in that regard. I'm sure you will be with me to protect Bahamians everywhere.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the honourable member for Central and South Abaco.
Anyway, Mr. Deputy, they were told that if they were caught fishing without a license, they could be fined on the spot.
We're going to fix that.
Or these are people who, normally would go out in the boat just to catch a meal of fish. I sincerely hope that this will not become standard procedure. In fact, one irate fisherman asked, how many more licenses will the government impose on Bahamians, in addition to the fees now paid for boat license, driver's license, car license, this is exactly marriage license, business license, national insurance contribution, value-added tax and real property tax, etc. So that is exactly, he was half-hot when he was talking to me, but that is exactly what he mentioned to me. That's very concerned. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy, Abaco is on the move. A lot of development has occurred in Abaco in the last few years. Abaco has a new hospital, Mr. Deputy. And when it is fully operational, it will employ some additional 80 persons. This will certainly be a good employment boost for the entire island of Abaco. And Abaco also has a new airport terminal, Mr. Deputy. The airport facility is on par with the one in Grand Bahama and Nassau. But, Mr. Deputy, the government needs to consider extending the runway by an additional 1,500 feet in order to allow for larger aircraft to land. This is very necessary, Mr. Deputy, because Abaco has the fastest growing economy of all the islands in the Bahamas. It only makes sense to properly equip this facility to perform at its optimum capacity. Mr. Deputy, the new Wilson City electric plant is a 48-megawatt generating plant. This will serve the needs of Abaco for the next 15 to 20 years. And yes, Mr. Deputy, the island of Abaco has not suffered as much as some of the other islands as a result of the economic downturn. But this was because of the many anchor projects that are ongoing there. Mr. Deputy, I am talking about projects like Baker's Bay, Winding Bay, Schooner Bay, Serenity Point, and Treasure Key. The Deputy, Baker's Bay alone employs some 500 Bahamians. It is the second home community. And Mr. Deputy, and it represents another huge economic benefit for the island of Abaco, and by extension, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Deputy, the island of Abaco is doing well in spite of the economic difficulties. Abaco has more marinas than all of the islands of the Bahamas combined. Every year, approximately 8,000 to 10,000 yachts visit Abaco, some for fishing tournaments. This is impressive, Mr. Deputy, and we can hardly estimate the true economic value of all of this activity to the island of Abaco and indeed the Bahamas. We do have two areas of concern, Mr. Deputy. And the first one is the condition of the roads in Marsh Harbor, Dundas, and Murphytown. One would think that after being awarded a contract for $1.3 million back in early January, the contractor, Simmons Construction, would have by now completed the paving and surfacing of the road. But no, Mr. Deputy, these roads remain in a pretty deplorable state. The work that has been done leaves a lot to be desired. I would, however, wish to commend the Minister for Public Works for the excellent workmanship on the highway leading from the roundabout at the Marsh Harbor International Airport to the new hospital. We can only hope that should the rest of the road works be completed, that they would be up to this standard. There's another small matter of roads from the town to the north end of Oaktown that is in desperate need of repair. This road is heavily traversed by second homeowners and locals, dozens of them. and it would only require about a week's work with some local equipment and fill to put this road back in shape. The second area of concern is the inadequate funding for local government in central Abaco. Because of the wide area, which includes Marsh Harbor, Dundas and Murphytown, and Spring City, the population of which represents more than 50% of the island of Abaco, local government has always been underfunded in this area. And I see that yet again the allocations have been reduced. This will make an already difficult job even more difficult. But, Mr. Deputy, I guess this is just a reflection.
Member for Michael rises. Could you kindly yield?
Speaker,
Sorry, he hasn't yielded.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Michael.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in deference to the member for South Abaco, I believe that during the contribution of the member for North Eleuthera, I cleared up what might be, in my own words, the misconception that the local government's budgets have been reduced. That is not exactly so. I said why in certain areas, if you look at it, you would see that there are only several or few town councils' budgets that have been slightly reduced, not because of any other reason than some of the services which were hitherto rendered by the local government council, like, and I used the landfill management used to be in certain areas, like Marsh Harbor, and now the central government thought it fit to put it under the central government. So there was no need to leave the money with them when the management of it has been turned over to the central government. And so you would see some adjustments, but there is no decrease in the budgetary allocations for the work that they are being asked to do. Quite frankly, in most cases, they would have gotten an increase in their capacity to do the things which they're being asked to do. For example, I indicated, and I will indicate further, that the local government council had hitherto paid the salary of some central government employees. They worked for the central government, but they were being paid by the local government council. We have now, as a government, taken on most of those employees who worked for more than 15 years in those capacities. So, Marsh Harbor, we have taken on about 15 or 20 such persons. Just a moment. That equates almost $150,000. So that money is now being left with the local government council. Even though we took on the employees, we are not taking the money from them. We are leaving them with the money to do things which hitherto they were not able to do. So they're much better off. And I want the analysis to show that they are going to be much better off under this administration than they were under the previous administration because of what we have been able to do. I have the pudding. Just eat it. I have the pudding. Just eat it. Just eat it. And so, Mr. Speaker, that's the explanation. Things are going to be better.
Thank you.
What you mean?
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Central and South Abaco.
Thank you, Michael. But I understand that clearly. But what I'm really trying to get across is that it's always been underfunded. I'm not blaming that on this government or another government, but I think it's always been underfunded. Living in an area like, and representing an area like, it requires a lot to upkeep all of the necessary things. But, Mr. Speaker, I guess this is just a reflection of the course the government is taking in its austerity measures. And I understand that. I will not seek to be a commentator on the decision of the government. I know they have more information than I do. So I guess we will all have to make adjustments. Mr. Deputy, we all agree that we are a small nation compared with other countries in this hemisphere, with a population of just around 200,000 employed taxpayers who bears the weight of the astronomical national debt. We certainly cannot compare ourselves to our neighbors in North America with populations of over 200 million taxpayers. Mr. Deputy, if we have any hope of surviving as an independent nation looking to first world status, we are going to have to revamp the way we currently do business in this country. I am speaking specifically to the inordinate length of time it takes to make decisions on projects, and by that I mean approvals for foreign direct investors, and in some instances, local investors. The Deputy, according to recent released statistics, foreign direct investment is down some 50%, according to the news media. Unemployment is at an alarming rate, and crime is beyond our wildest imagination. I'm loud. You gotta listen. Mr. Deputy, in this 2013-2014 budget communications, the government has indicated that there will be an additional taxes levied on the commercial banks. I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if any consideration has been given to the fact that there are more than 4,000 persons employed, Bahamians, employed in this industry, a predominantly white-collar industry, and that they represent an additional 4,000 spin-off jobs in the form of maids, housekeepers, gardeners, and various other professions. This is probably equal to the number of persons employed at the Atlantis Resort. I wish to make the point, Mr. Deputy, because it is a matter of concern, not only me, but others, including bank employees, who feel that their jobs may be in jeopardy if the government brings too much financial pressure to bear, as the potential exists for further outsourcing of certain services and or downsizing. These white-collar positions translate to the tune of around $160 million in salaries alone annually, and does not include national insurance contributions, work permit fees, or business license fees, nor to mention the health insurance benefits and pension plans. Mr. Deputy, there is an old saying that we shouldn't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So having said that, I would humbly submit that the government exercise prudence in dealing with these highly sensitive matters. Mr. Deputy, in just a few short weeks, on July 10th, the Bahamas will celebrate 4. However, that is not to say, Mr. Deputy, that we have not made our mark in the world, as our world-class athletes have on many occasions brought the world to its feet at their stellar performances. But the question that remains uppermost in most of our minds is the Bahamas better off today, July 13th, than it was 40 years ago? In some respect, the answer is a resounding yes, while in other respects we have to pause and think about it. Yes, every child born in the Bahamas since July 10, 1973 has access to free education and good health care. We have the social safety net, national insurance, infrastructural development throughout New Providence and the Family Islands, affordable low-cost housing, and the list goes on. But, Mr. Deputy, on the flip side, 40 years ago, these things were almost non-existent, even in New Providence, but especially were they absent in the Out Islands, as they were known. However, 40 years ago, we could boast that we had no national debt, no unemployment, and crime such as it was limited to a few domestic squabbles on an occasional theft. Bahamians could go to sleep or leave their homes unattended and not even have to lock their doors. Young and older ladies could walk the streets day or night without fear of being accosted. So yes, Mr. Deputy, while we have made great strides in our national development, we have sadly allowed those things which we once held near and dear, such as love for God and our neighbors, which is the greatest commandment, to fall by the wayside. The story of Moses and his 40-year quest to lead the children of Israel into the promised land is, I'm sure, very familiar to most, if not all of us. And Mr. Deputy, even though this event took place more than 4,000 years ago, there are lessons to be learned every day. Just like the Israelites who complained bitterly against Moses, even though he continued working and praying day and night for 40 years on their behalf, so Bahamians find every opportunity to complain against whatever government is in power. Just like Moses, we politicians get blamed for everything that's wrong, whether or not we had anything to do with it. And like Moses, we too get frustrated and angry and tired of being blamed. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy, I have just one challenge that I'd like to leave with the people of this nation, and that is, stop complaining. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And I quote, together with God's help, we can build this nation into the greatest little country on the planet. Together, we can. God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for South Beach.
Mr. Speaker, as I rise, as always, I would like to acknowledge the Almighty God, for it is He that gives wisdom. Mr. Speaker, I begin my contribution with a quote by the Honorable Perry Gladstone Christie, June 8, 2011. And he said, at all times, it must begin with us who are privileged to be leaders in our time, to make life better for the disadvantaged, the suffering, the sick, and the afflicted, to not be distracted from the central commitment of people before things, and Bahamian first. Mr. Speaker, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to the good people of South Beach who continue to demonstrate a level of trust and confidence in me to advance their concern in this honorable place. Mr. Speaker, before I make my contribution, I would like also to congratulate young Mr. Duncombe from Jasmine Gardens, Mr. Speaker, and his family, who this young man would have received a $100,000 scholarship to attend a college in the U.S. As I said before, good son. As I said before, there are young men whose faces are not in the front page of the tabloids, Mr. Speaker. Neither would you hear their names on talk shows. But, Mr. Speaker, these young men are doing positive things in this country. And this is why, Mr. Speaker, I will give to them every accolade and praise they deserve every opportunity I get. Mr. Speaker, we should be comforted to know that all is not lost in our country. And this young man and many others are those who make a family and a nation proud. Mr. Speaker, I would like to express my sincerest condolences on behalf of my family to the McKinney family and on behalf of the South Beach community, especially Verley McKinney, Mr. Speaker, who is one of my constituents for the passing of his father. Please permit me to extend a deepest gratitude to the South Beach Oversight Committee, headed by young Mr. Henshaw, for the work they have done and still doing in the spirit of community building. Mr. Deputy, this dynamic group of men and women of all political persuasion, PLP, FNM, and DNA, dare to cross the political lines to form a committee which plays a pivotal role in community building and presenting the concerns and good ideas for the development of the South Beach constituency. Mr. Speaker, at about 6:30 a.m., after the devastating flood in New Providence, I drove to the South Beach community to assess the damages. Mr. Deputy, the sight of people's homes underwater brought tears to my eyes, because I knew that some of them were struggling at the time, and some of them were out of jobs, and to lose the furniture in their homes and other valuables just added to their financial desolation. Mr. Speaker, South Beach is a low-lying area, especially the area just east of the South Beach Police Station. And the water table is high. When it rains, ordinarily, water settles in areas more than other parts of New Providence. But, Mr. Deputy, for years I have heard successive governments speak about placing effective drainage system in Pinewood Garden, which extends to South Beach. But to this day, nothing is done. And, Mr. Deputy, the question is, what will it take before we as leaders understand the physical, emotional, financial, and psychological impact that over 25,000 persons suffer when they encounter this kind of devastating disaster? Mr. Speaker, I believe the time is fast spent to have proper drainage system in the South. I think the time has come to explore new plans, such as ponds and wasteland basin drainage, or other sustainable urban renewal drainage system. The reality is, Mr. Deputy, something needs to be done in Pinewood and in South Beach. Mr. Deputy, like the member for Pinewood would have said, the member for Kalani also visited the South Beach constituency. But, Mr. Speaker, I never take anything for granted. Oh, yes. I never take anything the F&M do for granted, Mr. Speaker. As experience would have taught me, there are always ulterior motives behind what they do. What amazes me is they did not care enough to walk about in South Beach for 5 years. And only just before election, they decided to walk about. And I am, as I said, convinced that there must be some ulterior motive. Mr. Deputy, while this walkabout was going on, Mr. Deputy, my phone was flooded with calls and text messages. And Mr. Speaker, I will just read to you a few of the less explicit texts that came to me on that day. One says, Miss H, check this out, with the picture, Mr. Deputy. These people must think we fool. They got short memory now. The other said, the gall of the F&M. Why they through here? They think we forget what they do to us so quickly? Another said, my MP, we see red. They better than come to my corner. We ain't forget. Another said, who they think we are? We still in the mess they put us in. And Mr. Speaker, I chose those ones because some was really explicit. But I chose those ones, Mr. Speaker, because the people haven't forgotten. And if the member for Kalani think otherwise, he is sadly mistaken. I made it my personal mission and purpose not to let the people of this nation nor the F&M forget what they did to this country, so that the 14, 15, and 16-year-olds, like the member for Foxhill said, will remember. Mr. Speaker, the children will remember how they had to do their homework under the street lights because of the F&M failed policies. Mr. Speaker, they will remember their parents' business closing because of prolonged road works and the F&M fighting their mom and dads rather than to compensate them for their financial loss. Mr. Speaker, they will remember their parents packing up their things and leaving their homes, which they grew up in all of their lives, because their homes were repossessed by the banks.
Equally.
Mr. Speaker, the children will remember, and we will not let them forget.
Yes.
The F&M Prime Minister governing with an iron fist of oppression and mistrust, and demonstrated his desire to dominate those who serve under him. We must never let them forget how the F&M imposed early retirement on 500 civil servants. In fact, some of those employees still had their mortgages and other financial obligations.
Yes.
They will remember how the F&M sent more than 800 workers home from BTC. Then in 2011, sold their inheritance to the lowest bidder, a company in whom they had no confidence, against the will of the people, Mr. Speaker. And yet, the member for St. Anne's have the right to stand in this honorable place and ask why the PLP ain't get it back yet. Mr. Speaker, the gall of that man.
His former leader said we can't get it back.
$4.2 million, that's what they paid for it.
Mr. Speaker,
I gave him a check.
Exactly.
That's what you do.
we will remind them
10 million.
how the F&M canceled the government guaranteed scholarship program without notice. And many Bahamians had to come back home. Many of our young Bahamians who were in school had to come back home. We will let our children and our grandchildren know how to have them rob the public treasury, place the country in large financial debt. They will know how the FNM...
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that the member for South Beach kindly reconsider her thoughts about the FNM robbing the public treasury. I think that, while she goes on to pontificate on many of her views and opinions, that certainly has no basis in fact. Please have her retract that.
Well, Mr.
Member,
Speaker,
I
let
recognize
them
the honourable
say
member for South Beach.
where the money gone.
Mindful of what the
Let
honourable
them
member for
say
Long
where the
Island
money
is.
gone if they didn't rob it, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
Mr. Speaker, I urge you, that is very unparliamentary. In other words, this woman is, the member for South Beach is imputing that there are criminals in here who robbed the public treasury, and that is totally unparliamentary.
Member,
Mr. Speaker.
honourable member for South Beach, I would indicate that if you were
Remove the
indicating...
money from the public treasury without permission.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for Long Island.
This is totally a waste of time if the member for South Beach does not understand what her role is as the member and what the rules of the Parliament suggest. Now, if she doesn't know, then maybe she should take her seat. But this is totally ridiculous, duplicitous, and unnecessary.
Honourable member for
Speaker.
South Beach.
The Bahamian people knows that the money left the treasury. So however the member for Long Island would like to fix it, that's a problem.
No, you need to
Could
take
you
that back.
could you
because you are
withdraw
totally wrong.
Long Island, member for Long Island? Can you then withdraw?
Mr. Speaker, you did not, with all due respect, sir, when the monies for the Bahamas government are used, it is articulated in this budget. There was nothing removed from the public treasury except one time when an armed robbery took place at the public treasury under the PLP.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for South Beach. Honourable member for South Beach, I would ask you to withdraw the content or withdraw the comment.
Speaker.
Thank you. Kindly continue.
Mr. Speaker,
Down in the cookie jar. 160 million to carry with it.
Mr. Deputy, they will know how the FNM exercise poor physical prudency, Mr. Speaker. Tax and oppress the people during deep recession. Yes, Mr. Speaker. The children will remember. Mr. Speaker, since the election, Mr. Speaker, since the election in May 2012, my office has never been closed. The initial day allocated to see constituents was on Thursday afternoons. But I soon discovered that the afternoons will continue into late evenings, sometimes up to 10 and 11 o'clock in the nights, which was not safe, neither good for the people. So over the past 7 months, I changed the time to Monday mornings until everyone is sane. Mr. Speaker, it was not until I sustained injury to my leg and my arm I realized the location upstairs of my office, how it affected the disabled and the elderly. So we secured a building just across from the C.V. Bettle School for a new constituency office and a community center. Mr. Speaker, we also completed the gazebo that was left in Bougainville Park halfway done by the previous member from South Beach, Mr. Fenton no more. Mr. Fenton Nemo, or his name is Nemo.
The chair recognizes the honourable member from Long Island.
I would ask that the member for South Beach please refrain from calling persons that sat in this place
not by unreal names. If she's referring to Mr. Nemore, I ask that she retract the statement Fenton no more, which she said. Thank you.
Honorable Member for South Beach, continue.
Mr. Fenton Nemore, but he is. But she needs to retract it.
Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Long Island.
Asking Mr. Deputy that you see nothing wrong with that.
Before the Honorable Member for South Beach took her seat, she clarified the name Nemore. So I'm not asking her to retract. I'm not asking her to retract anything. She's clarifying.
She only did after I stood to my feet, sir.
Thank you, Member for Long Island. Continue, Member for South Beach.
Huh? Notice the jack.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we all in this honorable house can agree that the major complaints from the people we represent are unemployment, crime, the loss of homes, and those of us who are fortunate to have homes, disruption in their electricity service. Mr. Deputy, the majority of young persons seeking employment will express that they want to be employed with the government. Countless number of young men and women wanting to join the police force, the defense force, prison system, customs and immigration department. And I am sure there are hundreds of applications back up in these areas for years, all waiting to serve their country in a meaningful way. One is left to question, why have we as a country has not reconsidered national service? Mr. Speaker, in his keynote address November 4th, 1994, Sir Lyndon Pinland said, and I quote, "I firmly believe that national service is the key to solving their manhood problems. That national service is the key to solving our crime. And that national service will eventually solve the unemployment problem. For this to happen, however, national service will have to be comprehensive. The new national service of which I speak is a program in human development, a program in continuing education. Consequently, it must contain educational programs, vocational programs to teach and to develop skills of economic importance, and it must also contain character-building programs and teach manhood, responsibilities, and caring. This kind of national service will provide young people with opportunity and the means to obtain the recognition and earn the respect they want." He further went on to say, Mr. Speaker, fellow delegates, our stated concerns and our determination to do something about crime would be insincere and meaningless if what we do is demonstrated only by what we are prepared to do to young people and not what we are prepared to do for young people. Mr. Speaker, 20 years hence, because this vision was not realized, the impact of social neglect have finally came home to roost. Mr. Deputy, we all know it is impossible to absorb everyone in the public sector. So to assist my constituents, Mr. Speaker, I created a system whereby all individuals who would have applied for employment anywhere brought me a copy of their application form. Seeing that I get the newspaper free every day, Mr. Speaker, I check the want ads, match them up with the job application received, and then call the individuals and let them know who is hiring and what jobs are available. Mr. Deputy, this method has met reasonable success. From the 207 applications I collected, I am now down to 83. And every now and then, someone will push their head in my office door just to say thanks. And I knew they got the job. And although this task is very demanding, Mr. Speaker, the fact that I can help a person get a job just through using the newspapers every morning is a major reward. Mr. Speaker, while the majority of people understand the mess the FNM had left this country in, it is hard to say to that father or that mother who does not have employment to hold on, things will be better. Our people are hurting. And while the economy has turned the proverbial corner, we hope that the proverbial corner, the proverbial corner,
Address the chair, South Beach.
we hope that
Member
it
for
pick
South
up
Beach.
the pace so that Bahamians can get relief they so badly needed at this time. Mr. Speaker, it is my opinion that those of us who represent constituencies, it is a good thing to have our back-to-school Easter and Christmas parties, give out Mother's Day and Father's Day cards, grieve and attend funerals with families who went on before us. And in keeping with conventional wisdom, Mr. Speaker, always be seen in your constituency, listening to the people's concern. But, Mr. Deputy, while this is all good, people in your constituency also want to see substantive progress in their communities. They want their roads to be repaired and paved, their parks built, garbage collected in a timely manner, derelict vehicle removed from their constituency, their streets be safe, damaged street lights repaired, and the rebuilding of pride in their communities. And above all, Mr. Speaker, these people are depending on us. Mr. Speaker, this is why some cabinet ministers are becoming used to seeing me showing up in their offices. And I will continue to do so, because letters, emails, texting, and all form of verbal communication are not working. Mr. Deputy, South Beach has been grossly neglected by the FNM during their term in office, and I made a vow to the good people of South Beach that I will not be silent, neither will I stop trying to ensure that they are never neglected under this administration. Mr. Speaker, South Beach is in need of adequate lighting in immediate proximity to the beach. South Beach is in dire need of a bathroom in that immediate facility at the beach. Mr. Speaker, no, I am not asking for that $250,000 kind of bathroom facility, Mr. Speaker. Like what was on Sanders Beach, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, there is a definite need for bathroom facilities in that area. Mr. Speaker, the plan is already drawn to erect a state-of-the-art, biodegradable, eco-friendly community center, complete with photovoltaic energy and green space, where the children and young people in South Beach will not only focus their attention on academics, but also learn how to grow and produce fruits and vegetables and potted plants. They will also be taught dispute resolution, vocational and leadership skills, so that they will become good, well-rounded citizens. It is anticipated that the funds allocated to the South Beach community along with financial and material assistance from the public sector, from the private sector, and the government, will be used to complete this project. Mr. Speaker, the southern New Providence is a very beautiful place and has potential for economic sustainability and social progress. Therefore, this Member of Parliament is resolved to do everything she can to ensure that South Beach get a piece of the economic pie, realizing that there is much to do, but little time to do it. Mr. Deputy, the budget clearly addressed economic challenges which define the work of this government. To suggest that the government was wrong to reduce the surplus is to suggest that we should reverse those actions by putting the country in more debt than is necessary. Mr. Speaker, the F&M have already demonstrated what can happen to a country when the government decides to spend, like a group of liberated schooners balling on a Saturday night. So, Naughty Lutra, please understand that trying to take our country out of debt is not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Christianomics.
Mr. Speaker, that's Christianomics. Mr. Deputy, my personal hope is that the two outstanding menaces of this society, unemployment, especially among youths, and crime will remain priority. And I am certain that I speak for the people of South Beach in expressing these priorities. Mr. Speaker, according to ILO Global Unemployment Trends for Youth 2011, the global youth unemployment rose from 11.8 to 12.7% between 2008 and 2009. The largest one-year increase in record. In the 10 years from 1998 to 2008, youth unemployment increased by a total of 0.2%, or about 100,000 persons per year. But from 2008 to 2009, it increased by 5.3%, or 4.5 million persons in a single year. By the end of 2010, an estimated 75.8 million young people were unemployed. Mr. Deputy, Mr. Speaker, unemployment among young people in the Bahamas is 34%. And that does not include approximately 20,000 young people will be graduating from our schools this year. Our challenge, 4,000 coming out of our school this year. Our challenge is great, and the question is, what can we do to get our people employed? In October 28, 1975, Sir Lyndon Pinland said, and I quote, "However, the whole Bahamian society must realize that, to a large extent, it is partly to be blamed for the problems facing our youths. Our society, by virtue of high goals and ideals, which it set, had created certain attitudes which have turned out to be two-edged swords. Bahamian society has said to our youth, and I was one of the members of the society who carried a message: you must have an education, a piece of paper. You must have a white-collar job. But society did not realize at the time that those who could not get either would become so-called failures or dropouts, and so on. Our Bahamian society must now rethink its value system and modify it accordingly. Mr. Speaker, the second is crime on our streets. And while it is important to continue the aggressive approach to fighting crime as outlined in the budget communication, it is equally important for parents, schools, churches, and the wider community to take a stand and say enough is enough and do their part hand in hand with the government. Mr. Deputy, the challenges before us are so great that they should compel us to put aside partisan sharpness and to find common purpose. Mr. Speaker, the writer of the national anthem, Timothy Gibson, admonishes us to see how the world marks the manner of our burial. Each of us as citizens in this Bahamas must ask ourselves, what is the manner of our burial? Do we want our country to fail, or do we want it to succeed? And if we choose the latter, then let's do it together. We have a Prime Minister who is committed and has the confidence to present an aggressive agenda to navigate this country through one of the most difficult times in this nation's history. We are confident that by the help of God and good governance, this country will continue to move forward and upward. Mr. Speaker, in one of Sir Lyndon's speeches, he said, I envision a nation standing on 4 pillars: national insurance, national accountability in the public sector, national defense for our borders, and national insurance. Mr. Speaker, 3 of these pillars are already in place, but the 4th has been long in coming: national health insurance. I was a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission, Mr. Speaker, for National Health Insurance, and then on the Committee for the Implementation of the National Health Insurance in the PLP last term in office. And it is my opinion that one of the biggest disappointments was not having National Health Insurance implemented prior to the 2000 election, as it was one of those initiatives the FNM stopped, reviewed, and canceled. Hubert Ingram's FNM government has turned back on the provision of comprehensive national health insurance plan, which would allow access to proper health care for all Bahamians, Mr. Speaker, regardless to their social, religious, or economic background. This was the most progressive government initiative afforded to the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas since the introduction of national insurance by the PLP in 1972. During this time, not only did the FNM make Bahamian people feel that national health insurance was wrong for them, it was later discovered that the FNM true reason for not implementing national health insurance was that they believed Bahamians did not deserve it.
And to take care of the friends.
The member rises on a point of order.
Yes,
Member kindly yield. The chair recognizes honorable member for Long Island.
You know, Mr. Speaker, to sit and listen sometimes to the misleading statements made by this member is really unbelievable. The FNM never said they opposed national health insurance. What they said is that it should have been brought in gradually. And we started it, Mr. Speaker, with the prescription drug plan. And so this member is totally misleading this House in that regard. And even today, Mr. Speaker, the party that said they would bring such a a plan to the Bahamian people are still putting it in committee because of its exorbitant cost. No one thinks that Bahamians should not have it, and so I ask that she retract that.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair would rule that the member from South Beach, take your seat, please. Take your seat. The Chair would rule that the member need not retract that particular statement because you have got an opportunity to retort, and that was accepted, and I thank you for it. A member for South Beach, be ever mindful in your use of language, and continue your presentation. The Chair recognizes Honourable Member for South Beach.
Mr. Speaker, I have been a nurse for 32 years, and I have seen firsthand many incidents where people could not afford the care they needed, hence their demise, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will give you an example of a man who came from Abaco, Mr. Speaker. He was placed on the male medical ward. 1.5 weeks later, another gentleman came in, diagnosed with the same problem. Mr. Speaker, the same physician took those two patients. But the one who came after told the physician that he had insurance. So he was discharged, given an admission slip to go to the private services the following week. He had his surgery and his treatment and left. The gentleman who came from Abaco stayed there, never got the treatment he required because he could not afford the medication and the surgery that this physician had. And that man eventually died. Mr. Speaker, we need national health insurance. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the government's recommitment to national health insurance affirm its commitment to a humane and affordable approach to relieve human suffering, to ensure that regardless of status, social repute, or income, all citizens receive quality health service. Mr. Speaker, I am a mother who does my grocery shopping for my family. And one of the signs I observe on food supplies and other products coming from the U.S. is for export only, which means that these people are dumping their garbage in what they, in our country, what they term as third world country. Mr. Speaker, this means that these particular food are either genetically enhanced or of substandard quality, and is not to be used in their country of origin, but to be exported in our country. Mr. Speaker,
and kill a couple of the brothers there.
the establishment of a School of Agriculture and Marine Science cements the government's commitment to minimizing the amount of imported food supplies to this country, feeding its people with products grown in the Bahamas, as the member for South Abaco said, and ensure that citizens have access to skills and high level of knowledge they need for nation building. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me to ignore an alarming trend that is developing in this country as regard to percentage of nurses, foreign nurses, versus Bahamian nurses registered with the Nursing Council in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, let me make it absolutely clear here that I am by no means anti-foreign. But when your foreign labor in the hospital so vastly surpass your local labor, then something is definitely wrong. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this is a result of a combination of variables. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, because the base entry for nursing in the country is a Bachelor of Science degree. Maybe because enough is not being done to attract, recruit, and retain young men and women to the nursing profession. Can be because the College of Bahamas does not meet the demands necessarily to supply our healthcare facilities. Maybe because nurses are being imported for cheap labor. The money that they would want to pay the foreign nurses, they do not want to pay the Bahamian nurses. But Mr. Speaker, whatever the case may be, I believe that something needs to be done to revive this honorable profession. Mr. Speaker, while I believe that it is necessary to have BEC exempt from excise tax on fuel imports as a means of providing relief on electricity costs, I also believe that the time has come for the government to examine other alternative energy, Mr. Speaker. Take solar energy, for example. We can use solar energy strategies to effectively lessen the current electrical and financial load produced by fossil fuel, which will in turn provide both a short and long-term solution to our country energy situation. When we look at it logically, Mr. Speaker, if one home has a photovoltaic or solar energy system providing its own electrical energy, it will be one less unit that the electrical corporation will have to provide energy for. It sounds simple, Mr. Speaker, but let's take it a step further. The home is occupied at its peak during the early mornings and during the late evenings. But during the day, which happens to be the peak time for solar panel exposure to the sun, hence the peak time for electrical production, the occupants of the home are at work or at school. This means that the home has low electricity need at its peak electricity production. That is, it makes more electricity when there are less people to consume it. Mr. Speaker, this is where the electrical company comes into play. The electricity company can then put the surplus solar electricity back into the electrical grid, which means that the home essentially acts as a battery that provides a percentage of power back to the actual electrical company. And not just power, Mr. Speaker, but clean, renewable power. This electricity can be redistributed to businesses and other homes. Mr. Speaker,
We need the money.
the more homes with solar panels, the more renewable energy reproduced. And the thing with solar or photovoltaic panels is that it can be applied both to new buildings and retrofitted to existing buildings. This allows an immediate solution to the reduction and eventual elimination of fossil fuel. Mr. Speaker, presently the main obstacles are renewable energy policies, Mr. Speaker, renewable energy incentives, renewable energy education, renewable energy industries, and most of all, Mr. Speaker, renewable political will. Mr. Speaker, consider the opportunities renewable energy programs can provide with the realms of education, trade and vocational training at secondary and tertiary levels, industry, local jobs for Bahamians in designing, installing, and managing renewable energy. and the overall effects on the economy and the environment, whilst we grow as a nation and bring more responsible citizens of not just our country, but of our planet. Mr. Speaker, the average Bahamian is struggling. And I believe that if this current government can find a way to relieve citizens of this country from the burden of high electrical costs, then every effort should be done to do it. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, please permit me to remind ourselves as leaders and the good citizens of the country that except the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that built it. And except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waited, but in vain.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, may God bless you, and may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Pine Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before getting into my communication, I would just like to join the member for South Beach and just echo in these halls of Parliament the need for national health insurance. It is a need, it is a must for our people, and this government is working diligently to revise and begin to implement all of the necessary procedures to make that happen. This afternoon I rise in support of the budget communication 2013-14 and the resolution to borrow $465 million, which will allow for the improvement of our educational system, improvement to national security and crime-fighting techniques, the enhancement of the lives of our citizenry through our Urban Renewal 2.0 programs, effective marketing and promotion of our tourism product, training and development of our workforce, which will ultimately result in increased entrepreneurial opportunities and employment for Bahamians throughout our archipelago. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be a cabinet member in this progressive government. I'll say that again. I am proud to be a cabinet member in this progressive government, which is committed to bringing relief and opportunities for all Bahamians and is working diligently to protect and to secure the economic stability for our country. Upon coming to office approximately a year ago, this administration was exposed to the sobering reality of severe economic state of our country and what was left behind by the Free National Movement. Consequently, we were forced to buckle down and execute prudent fiscal management of the taxpayers' money in order to secure and protect the future for our country. Immediately, a team from the Ministry of Finance, under the leadership of the Right Honourable Member for Centerville and the Member for Golden Isles, implemented prudent fiscal management and measures. They found the leaks in the system, determined ways to protect precious taxpayers' resources, and could be more effective and executed their techniques to effectively manage and to stop the country from spiraling out of control. Today, I am pleased to inform the residents of Grand Bahama that the 2013-2014 budget, being the first prepared by this administration, is people-centered. This budget is people-centered. This is about the people of the Bahamas. And in our Charter of Governance, we indicated that we will bring much-needed relief to the poor, the elderly, the unemployed, while implementing policies that will support the business community throughout the country. Mr. Speaker, before making my contribution to this debate, and with your leave, I would like to take a few moments to just thank the great people of Pine Ridge for the privilege to serve them in this honorable place. As I move into my second year as their Member of Parliament, I will always be grateful to the residents in my constituency for this humbling experience, which is afforded to only a few people in our lifetime. Today, many of my constituents are still unemployed after several years, which confirm the reality that we are facing severe economic challenges on Grand Bahama. They coming to get me? Well, I'm right here right now. Even though I have assisted numerous constituents with finding gainful employment, many are still dependent on social services, friends, and families to make ends meet. Mr. Speaker, last year, in my constituency alone, I documented 150 unemployed workers who have been out of work for the last 7 years. Fortunately, I am pleased to report today that the majority have expressed interest in being a part of the training program that will soon come to being under the Ministry of Labor. And this is scheduled to begin this summer. Mr. Speaker, I remain committed to serve all the residents in my constituency and will continue to work tirelessly, diligently, to create employment and entrepreneurial opportunities, to bring relief to the poor, the downtrodden, and transform lives by creating programs that will empower all the residents of Pine Ridge, irrespective of their political affiliation. Mr. Speaker, residents in Queens Cove and in inner city areas of Pine Ridge, whose homes are in disrepair, are benefiting from Urban Renewal 2.0 small home repair program, which is ongoing throughout Grand Bahama as I speak. I have also recently held a massive cleanup program and campaign in conjunction with sanitation services in the private subdivisions in my constituency, which is not a part of the sanitation services cleanup schedule. The response for residents have been phenomenal, and we will continue these important programs as we prepare for an active hurricane season. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the residents of Hawksbill subdivision are now driving safely on the newly paved roads with the addition of a new roundabout, which is strategically placed in the accident-prone highway leading into this residential community. Mr. Speaker, in response to the safety concerns expressed to me by the residents in that community, I contacted the Town Planning Department at the Grand Bahama Port Authority, and it is through agitation on this Member of Parliament that these roads are in there today. No, I only reporting to my constituents. You will have a time to do yours. Yeah.
Member for Pine Ridge. Member for Pine Ridge, address the chair.
Mr. Speaker, last year my after-school program was brought to a complete halt because of a string of break-ins at my headquarters on Pioneers Way. Nonetheless, I would like to inform residents that I have found another centrally located venue, and very shortly we will relaunch this very effective program. Mr. Speaker, it has come to my attention that despite the lunch program that is available in our schools on Grand Bahama, too many children in my constituency are still going to school without breakfast. Therefore, beginning this school year, I will launch the Pine Ridge Breakfast Program from my constituency headquarters on Pioneers Way, which will enable the less fortunate children in my area to have the most important meal of the day and prepare them for learning. Mr. Speaker, as minister responsible for the entire island of Grand Bahama, through my ministry, all constituents, including those of Pine Ridge, will have access to government initiatives and programs as outlined in our Charter of Governance, and many residents, including the elderly, the unemployed, the disabled, who sustained damage in Hurricane Sandy, will benefit from the NEMA roof repair program presently happening on Grand Bahama as I speak. It's available, my brother. Contact NEMA. Just this weekend on Grand Bahama, we experienced severe weather conditions with rains. As a result, many families throughout Grand Bahama experienced flooding, and reports are coming in from east to west Grand Bahama, as well as many of the low-lying areas in Freeport, of flood damage to homes and business places. Teams from both the Department of Social Services, Urban Renewal are on the ground as I speak assessing these damages. I am pleased to report that emergency funding will be allocated to my ministry to assist those affected by the severe weather patterns and the floodings over the holiday weekend. Pine Ridge, let me assure you that I am focused and committed to working hard on your behalf. And this year was certainly a difficult one for all of us on Grand Bahama, and you have been patient with this administration as we implement our recovery plan. But despite the challenges, we must never give up hope, because as your representative, I remain optimistic that in this second half of 2013, the residents of Grand Bahama will see a turnaround in our local economy, because our policies will bring meaningful relief and employment opportunities from east to west. Mr. Speaker, it has been 1 year since the birth of the Ministry for Grand Bahama, and I can assure you that we have come a long way and evolved into a fully functional ministry. I am extremely proud of our team of highly skilled and motivated Grand Bahamian professionals from both sides of the political divide, in the private and public sector, and who, may I add, are all working together for the common good to recover and to produce economic recovery for Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, the last administration promised the people of Grand Bahama a ministry, but failed to deliver. Let the record reflect that it was the Progressive Liberal Party who saw the need to focus on the revitalization of Grand Bahama, and within the first 100 days of coming to office, established the Ministry for Grand Bahama. Being the first ministry, yes, that's a mammoth responsibility. Being the first ministry formed outside of the capital and charged with the responsibility of bridging the gap between all associated government ministries and the private sectors on the island, my ministry has brought the synergy and organization required to deliver the relief needed to the residents from east to west Grand Bahama, and to provide and will provide to play and will prove to play a significant role in the future growth and development of Grand Bahama. In just 1 year, we have planted a seed. We have watched this seed emerge from the soil into a small plant. And with the support of the entire community, Mr. Speaker, Grand Bahama will nurture this plant into a mature tree with deep roots that will withstand severe weather patterns and will definitely bring forth fruit in due season. Mr. Speaker, the island of Grand Bahama, in my estimation, has a population in excess of 60,000 documented and undocumented residents. This figure exceeds the combined populations of 3 major islands, Abaco, Andros, and Exuma. As a matter of fact, the 3rd largest concentration of population in our country is in the settlement at 8 Mile Rock, from Hepburn Town to West End. Additionally, the last unemployment statistics indicated a 0.6% increase in the unemployment rate on Grand Bahama, from 17.4% to 18%. This increase was directly related to the discontinuation of the last administration's 52-week program, which we initially supported because it did help many unemployed Bahamians during the brunt of the global economic crisis. Unfortunately, due to the poor management and abuse for political gain by the last administration, the program exceeded its original budget by $28 million And because of the major financial constraints and the downgrade of our credit rating, which we experienced months to come into office, this administration was unable to sustain this program. From these statistics, Mr. Speaker, you can see that the Ministry for Grand Bahama, being the only ministry responsible for the entire island, is stuck with a mammoth task. Nonetheless, we are up to the challenge, and we vow to support, with the support of my colleagues, to transform Grand Bahama from an island dependent on social services back to a city where employment and entrepreneurial opportunities flourish. This is what the Progressive Liberal Party believe in, and this is what we are working towards. Mr. Speaker, for the past year, the portfolio for the Ministry of Grand Bahama have been outlined, discussed in the media, and many members in the business community on Grand Bahama already have a clear understanding of what the government intends to accomplish through my ministry, as well as the direction we're heading through the implementation of new policies. Many of the tasks that lies ahead are complicated and require community support, technical expertise, consultation with both the licensees of the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the residents of Grand Bahama. Therefore, we have assembled a team of project officers to conduct thorough research, identify areas of caution, examine possibilities, and make recommendations of best practices moving forward. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say that their orientation in public service is complete. And over the last month, they have completed much of the groundwork in this budget, and the residents for Grand Bahama will begin to see the results of their labor. Mr. Speaker, my ministry's primary responsibility is the restoration of Grand Bahama Island and its alien economy. Despite the many financial challenges we face over the last year, I am happy to say that we have made use of our time to collaborate with the private sector partners and other government agencies in order to finalize our blueprint and to make the initial step on the road to recovery. My ministry has been charged with many important mandates, each requiring much planning, negotiation, and investment in order to be accomplished. Today, I would like to discuss the progress we have made with each of them in the last fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, a good working relationship with the Grand Bahama Port Authority is paramount going forward in order for my ministry to carry out the government's aggressive agenda for Grand Bahama. There is an ongoing debate in Grand Bahama regarding the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and its effect on the economic growth and development of our island. Many residents and licensees of the Grand Bahama Port Authority are concerned about the relevance of this agreement that was signed in the late 1950s and affirm its need to be reviewed for the benefit of the owners, the government, and the residents of Grand Bahama. Others believe that this same agreement, which transformed Freeport from a pine forest to a city where awesome infrastructure is now present, is also responsible for the economic stagnation we're experiencing today. But the beneficial effects that we desire to see for Grand Bahama will certainly not come if the government opts to take a hands-off approach. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry for Grand Bahama has moved to tighten and advance the government's existing relationship with the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the Hutchison-Whampoa Group of companies, and other major stakeholders on the island to ensure that all of the aspects of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement are upheld, maintained, and constantly worked on. This administration is supportive of both local and foreign investors. With aid of the growth and development of our people and in the economy, we remain committed to the agreement signed in good faith, but going forward, this administration will ensure that Bahamians are given employment opportunities first and are the first ones to reap the rewards of investments in this beautiful country. Mr. Speaker, I have been criticized in the local daily for not ensuring that the Grand Bahama Port Authority takes a proactive approach to the marketing of Grand Bahama Island. However, during my one-year tenure, the Grand Bahama Port Authority has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in modern captive promotional materials in an effort to market the island of Grand Bahama under the catchy slogan dubbed Invest Grand Bahama, Imagine the Possibilities. These promotional materials were effectively used and will continue to be used both locally and abroad, and they are reaching potential investors around the world. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I, along with the representatives from my ministry, in collaboration with the Grand Bahama Port Authority, the Hutchison-Whampoa Group of Companies, the Grand Bahama Shipyard, traveled to Panama, Brazil, which are two economically vibrant nations, to promote Grand Bahama as an industrial, transshipment, and logistic trade center, and to attract direct foreign investment from South, Central America, the United States, India, and Asia. For the last 3 months, my ministry, along with the representatives of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, have been devising a joint marketing strategy for this year, and I am happy to report that my ministry now has budgetary allocation for marketing of Grand Bahama, both at home and abroad, and as a result of our joint efforts, investment groups are once again expressing serious interest in both our tourism and industrial sectors. Mr. Speaker, last year the Grand Bahama Port Authority partnered with my ministry, the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of the Bahamas Investment Authority, the Ministry of Financial Services, the Ministry of Environment and Housing, to facilitate the hosting of numerous international conferences and groups at our Lucaya Resort. They include the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, the Bahamas International Investment Forum, the Caribbean Shipping Executive Association's conference, which attracted visitors to Grand Bahama and injected millions of dollars into our local economy, creating numerous investment opportunities and exposing hundreds of investors to our state-of-the-art harbor and infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the real property tax provision of the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement will expire. Over the last year, my technical team have been conducting the initial research and determining the land inventory on Grand Bahama. In the very near future, my ministry, along with the Ministry of Finance, the Attorney General Office, will meet to determine the government's negotiating strategy moving forward. As part of the preliminary negotiations, we have revisited the Freeport Grand Bahama Act 1993 to ensure that both parties are satisfied that the requirements are outlined in the Act have been accomplished. Mr. Speaker, I am extremely pleased to report that the relationship with the government and the Grand Bahama Port Authority, which was strained under the previous administration, is now strengthened, and as a result, we will be able to move smoothly into the negotiation process. There are many opinions about the way the government should handle these negotiations with the port. And over the last year, we have been gathering information that would prove to be essential during the negotiation process. The government believes that the discussion should be open, and we must receive input from the community and licensees of the port, who will definitely be impacted as a direct result of the outcome. Although the Grand Bahama Port Authority has a contractual agreement with the Bahamas government, which we are responsible in honoring and monitoring, it is important that both the port and the government maintain a mutually beneficial relationship for the overall good of the island of Grand Bahama and its residents. Mr. Speaker, our Charter of Governance unequivocally indicates this administration's commitment to the establishment of duty-free concessions for East and West Grand Bahama, and we are well on our way to doing so. Therefore, on the drawing board in this year is the implementation of legislation to extend duty-free concessions to business licensees in East and West Grand Bahama. There is no doubt that this policy shift is complicated and much planning, negotiation, investment in order for it to be accomplished. For too long, residents and potential local business persons who reside in those who wish to invest in the outlying areas of Grand Bahama have been disadvantaged as compared to their counterpart in Freeport area. However, this PLP incentive was promised in our Charter of Governance, will level the playing field, and will allow residents in East and West Grand Bahama to finally gain benefits that have been done in Freeport for many years. I am happy to report that the draft of this legislation has been prepared for my ministry and forwarded to the Attorney General and the Ministry of Finance for vetting to ensure that there is no legal conflicts that will cause liability to the government and hinder our relationship with the Grand Bahama Port Authority and major investment groups on the island. We hope to have this table in this honorable house shortly. This important piece of legislation will stimulate economic growth outside of the Freeport boundary by attracting local and direct foreign investments to the outlying settlements. Very soon, we will visit settlements in East and West Grand Bahama to educate residents about the benefits of this legislation and the potential growth that will follow once this innovative piece of legislation becomes law. I will let you know.
Thank you very much.
This bill has great potential to change the lives of residents in East and West Grand Bahama and certainly will create entrepreneurial and employment opportunities in the outlying settlements of Grand Bahama and promote needed economic growth and development. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of this bill, the government, through my ministry, is seeking to do something that has never been done before in Grand Bahama. We are giving the true meaning to this quote. Do not go where the paths may lead you, because you may find nothing there. Go instead where there's no path and leave a trail. Mr. Speaker, we at the Ministry of Grand Bahama are doing just that. And despite the potential revenue loss as a result of duty-free concessions for East and West Grand Bahama, our in-house research clearly demonstrates that the economic stimulation and employment opportunities that will be created will certainly supersede the government loss in customs revenue in the outlying settlements of Grand Bahama. Once again, thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, thousands of jobs are tied up in the agricultural sector, and we must stop giving lip service to this industry and move to become self-sufficient and capitalize on opportunities that exist in the industry today. The promotion of agricultural development for Grand Bahama will help the government and the Ministry of Agriculture achieve its goal to grow what we can and import what we must. Mr. Speaker, this administration is serious about and committed to the diversification of our economy through the promotion of agriculture, which is clearly demonstrated in this year's budget by the allocation of $4 million for the establishment of the School of Agriculture in North Andros. That is where we need to go. This progressive move will certainly assist Bahamians to become trained in as agro experts, agro businessmen, and create the support to farmers that is so desperately needed throughout our country. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry for Grand Bahama has been given the mandate to lead the charge as it relates to promotion of agricultural development in Grand Bahama. Research has shown that there are thousands of jobs lying dormant in the agricultural sector, and the majority of the 30,000 acres of arable land located in East Grand Bahama is ideal for large-scale production. I'm not going to exploit the land. I will have you with me when we begin to show you which part we're going to actually begin to survey. They will definitely do so. Mr. Speaker, in short order, the Department of Agriculture will present a progressive plan going forward into 2030. I have had the opportunity to review this extensive plan, which includes Grand Bahama, and all of us who represent Family Island constituencies are excited because we clearly understand what this government is trying to do and the direction we're heading in, and it will definitely benefit Family Island jurisdictions. I am proud that finally we are serious about moving agriculture to where it needs to go. Mr. Speaker, in fulfilling our commitment in our Charter of Governance to diversify our economy through expansion of our agricultural sector, my ministry, in conjunction with the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, have devised a 3-year training program geared towards grade 10 students from private and public institutions called the Agricultural Cadet Corps Program, which acts as a feeder program for the School of Agriculture in North Andros. This program will offer both academic and practical training in areas of crop science, poultry production and husbandry, and we are presently in the final stages of vetting this program, which will provide the fundamental training that is needed in order to spark the interest. We realize that agriculture is so important to our economy these days that we need to start to spark the interest from the high school level. A few weeks ago, the chairman of BAIC was introduced to this proposed program and insisted that greenhouse production be included to introduce our students to this new technology, which would increase production of crops sometimes by tenfold. Farmers on Grand Bahama have experienced many setbacks over the years as a direct result of flooding and natural disaster. As a farmer myself, I too have experienced severe loss. The government of the Bahamas, like that in every developing country in the region, must invest in land preparation, technical support, marketing strategies necessary to ensure that produce grown in the family islands get to market and critical loss to the agribusiness person is prevented. Studies done by the IDB have confirmed this administration's belief that thousands of potential jobs can be available and can flourish from the agricultural sector, and the fact that we are not maximizing the potential grants and support from our international communities and treaties is something that we must look clearly into. Mr. Speaker, as our local economy rebounds, social services on Grand Bahama must continue to stand in the gap and to provide the necessary assistance to the poor, the sick, the elderly, the unemployed, because it is our moral responsibility as the government. The Ministry for Grand Bahama is working closely with the Ministry of Social Services to assist the minister in carrying out her mandate on Grand Bahama, which to address as many of the challenges of the thousands of residents that are humanly possible. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Social Services on Grand Bahama is presently working diligently to meet these needs. Nonetheless, with the passing of this budget, the Ministry of Grand Bahama, in conjunction with the Ministry of Works and Urban Development, will have additional resources to help the Department of Social Services carry out its important mandate for the needy on Grand Bahama. Over the next 6 months, the Ministry of Grand Bahama, in conjunction with the Urban Renewal Department, over the last 6 months, have reviewed hundreds of requests by the disabled, the unemployed, particularly in the inner city and the outskirts in East and West Grand Bahama, concerning minor home repairs. To date, many on the island have benefited from this initiative, but this year's budget, we have allocated some $10 million that will bring the necessary relief and support to do much more in Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, throughout my first year as Minister for Grand Bahama, my ministry's manpower resources were focused on identifying and determining the number of persons who are living below the poverty level and whose dwelling homes lack the proper facilities and infrastructure. Those on the side opposite laughed, literally laughed, at the concept of my Operation Flush, which was the sole purpose was to bring relief to the most disadvantaged residents in Grand Bahama. I find their actions to be very disturbing. Yes, your actions are very disturbing, as this program seeks to minimize the extreme situations that we are finding throughout Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, upon visiting Lewis Yard and Pindus Point area, where the member for Central Grand Bahama is responsible and the F&M has been representing for the past 20 years, we observed that many of the residents live in substandard conditions with no running water, no electricity, and no toilet facilities. As a result, many are depositing their fecal matter in plastic bags and disposing them in the nearby territories. There is absolutely no reason why in this time persons should be living in such conditions. There is no way, and I say that again, there is no way a caring government can allow this problem to go unresolved. That is why, in a matter of weeks, this administration will open a new urban renewal center in Lewis Yard and begin to address the serious social challenges that we found.
Member for Pine Ridge. The member yields. The chair recognizes the member for Central Grand Bahama on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the member for Pine Ridge is obviously seeking to mislead this House. While there are challenges of which he speaks, he gives the impression that this exists only in Grand Bahama. It exists right here in Nassau, New Providence, the capital, in Bain and Grandstown, and in Centerville. So he need not single out Lewis Yard and Pindus Point.
No.
But I can assure him that the people, those good people will deal with him accordingly.
Very well. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Member of Central Grand Bahama.
The member for Pine Ridge, you may continue.
Yes. I only reported what was found when the walkabout was done by the Ministry of the Environment and the Royal Bahamas Police Force and some other areas. The area is of concern to us and is concern to me as Minister for Grand Bahama. I am not saying that there are not other areas in Grand Bahama that do not have similar circumstances. Well, listen here. Well, between me and you, I am speaking.
Members, honourable members.
No, Central Grand Bahama.
Member, control your voices.
Yes.
Member for Pine Ridge, continue to address the chair.
Yes. Member for Central Grand Bahama, this is nothing that is trying to belittle the people of Pindus Point or Lewis Yard, or even trying to bring any reference to you as the representative. These are the clear facts. And these facts, I did not say that, maybe they do. As a matter of fact, as a matter of fact, I have found some of them in my own constituency.
Members?
Yes.
Members?
Yes.
Member for Pine Ridge, I remind you to continue to address the chair and the chair only.
There's absolutely no reason why in these modern times persons should live in such conditions. There's no way that a caring government can allow this problem to go unresolved. That is why, in a matter of weeks, this administration... I got to deal with that.
Member for Pine Ridge.
That is why, in a matter of weeks,
members,
administration will open a new urban renewal center in the Lewis Yard area and begin to address these serious problems. And I will invite you to come.
Members.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Last year, I set a goal to eliminate outside toilets on Grand Bahama over the next 24 months. And I am committed simply because they carry potential risks and have been implemented in the contamination of the water table and linked to the spread of many forms of communicable diseases. Mr. Speaker, under this caring administration, this budget now allows financial resources to be allocated to the Ministry of Grand Bahama through a line item on the urban redevelopment, which will ensure that these residents of Grand Bahama live in a cleaner, safer, and healthier community where the basic necessities of life are accessible to them. Mr. Speaker, the entire idea of environmental protection for the 60,000 residents of Grand Bahama is paramount going forward. And the relocation of Pindus Point and Lewis Yard is an issue that has simply been kicked down the road from administration to administration. This administration intends to bring closure to this vexing issue. Mr. Speaker, for too long we have brought lip service to many pressing issues about the environment on Grand Bahama and the potential negative impact that industry has had in the lives of individuals who live